Good evening all and welcome, and thank you all so much for being here. It means a lot that you choose to watch this channel. I have a chilling collection of scary stories in the rain for you to enjoy, but for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mother did all her gynecology appointments with a doctor in downtown Austin. He was on the 5th floor of this hospital building, and had a long-time nurse/receptionist called Allison. I remember attending her appointments when I was little and being in the waiting room, which was colourfully decorated with a forest scene. Allison was a super sweet woman who was half babysitter for us kids too. She would read us books, give us colouring books, and occasionally even listen to our dreadful knock-knock jokes. We'd all refer to her as Alice in Wonderland. Anyway, years down the road I got married and pregnant, and started searching for an OB since I had moved back to Austin relatively recently before that. My mother suggested I go see if that doctor, who was super young, below 30s when I was born, was still in business. Well, I could not find his name in the hospital directory, so I figured I would just swing by the office and check. My mother happened to be in town as she had moved years ago and came with me. We both joked about being so familiar, but reverse situations now. As we reached the stairs, we ran into a problem. There was no 5th floor to the hospital office building. Odd. We both must have misremembered it. We knew it was on the top floor, so it must have been the 4th. Nope, not there. We thought perhaps we were in the wrong building, except we parked in the same parking garage from 20 years ago and walked the same route. That doctor does not exist. Never did, apparently. My mother and my brother and I are the only ones who remember him in Alice in Wonderland. We have asked around, including amongst the hospital staff. We even looked up our birth certificates, which are new copies, and just list attending physician. One of my childhood memories is fake, but somehow shared with my brother and mother. What the hell is going on? When I was around 8 or 9, I was coming back from school with my grandmother. We were walking, as my grandmother's house was 100 meters from the school. In the road to the school there was a ruined red house. From the broken windows you could see damaged stuff, dust, garbage and the like. The house had a weird atmosphere, and my grandmother once told me that there was an old couple living there but they passed away, many years before I was even born. So that day, we were walking as usual, to home from school, and I vividly remember how the door was open, and inside was old furniture but not damaged. I mean, not any more a ruined house from the inside. At the doorstep there was an old man, and by his side an old woman, and they greeted us like long-term friends. I thought that was strange, as the description of my grandmother matched the two people there. Later in the afternoon, I went to my grandmother and asked her about who those people at the house were, and my grandmother said that she didn't remember seeing anyone. So I got out, went to the house, and it was, as always, ruined, no one inside. The house itself is now demolished, and the weird stuff is that my grandma doesn't remember anything about that. My grandmother wasn't even mentally ill or anything, and was barely 60 years old, so I don't know what the hell happened. I'm 36 now, but the following happened to me when I was 19. A quick bit of backstory. I worked as a volunteer firefighter in a small West Australian town in the southwest. In addition to the normal volunteer firefighter ins and outs of attending incidents, I was also involved in the sports side of the fire brigade. This comprised of the individual and team events, and the fire brigade you belonged to was your team. And across Western Australia, there were about 30 such teams/brigades, and between October to April, we would travel and compete. We had travelled to Geraldton to compete in the state championships in 1999, and I, through hard work, had won the Champion Fireman Award and was at the hosting fire brigade's after-event celebration, and was enjoying myself with my team drinking beer and socializing, which started around 5 p.m. While I admit I was pretty drunk, I was still traveling well, as there were a lot of people and a lot of my time was spent talking to officials, older members, and with friends catching up, so I had not really got my drink on yet. I needed to go to the toilet, so I just went around the corner and began to urinate in the garden like I had a few times before, and being the same for every other guy at the party. And that was when I got a phone call from an unknown number. Being away from the noise, I answered it, and I remember the guy asking for someone. I didn't know them and ended the call after perhaps 10 to 15 seconds of, "Sorry, wrong number." I finished and then went straight back to the party. When I was returned, I was in absolute shock. Everyone had disappeared. It was dead quiet. Every table and chair was neatly stacked, all the rubbish cleared and the lights off and the doors locked. It was just dead quiet, and not a sound could be heard across the town. I was very confused. I took my phone out, and it was just after 4 a.m. What the hell happened? I checked through it, and my phone showed literally dozens of missed calls and 30 to 40 messages of people searching for me and looking for me. I called my mate and made it back to my hotel, and over the next few days confirmed with many people that I had been standing in a circle and excused myself to take a leak. And after I received the phone call, that was that. No one saw any of me that night. Where I urinated was where everyone was doing it, so it's impossible that I could have been there unnoticed and a group of friends searched for me around while I was gone. I still don't know what happened, and I'm confused as hell. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of lights move across the sky. Keep in mind the winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amount of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down and just lay down on the snow looking up at the majesty of it all. The only thing disturbing the silence being the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. It doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start getting ignored after a while, as long as they aren't too spectacular anyway. On one night in particular, without asking my parents, as it was their snowmobile, I decided to go on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hills to find a spot devoid of light pollution from town, shut off the machine, and settled into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting of a scene, a few satellites passing here and there, some relatively boring, actively affecting the magnetic field, and that's when I started noting a clicking noise. At first I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down, as the engine expands and contracts a lot in the cold, but the source of the sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was there must be an animal nearby, in which case I needed to get out of there fast. You don't really want to mess with a wild animal, but the clicking is far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding, and again the source of the sound wasn't coming from anywhere around me laterally. It was coming from up, so naturally I look up determined to ascertain the origin of this strange noise. I see what I always see: stars, northern lights, and some lazy satellites floating across the sky, all normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and begin heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They were definitely getting brighter. I kept staring with morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still only remaining single points in the sky. All the while the clicking noise is getting louder and louder and more pronounced, almost like someone started with tapping a pen on a desk and clacking billiard balls together inside my head. Then it stops, the lights are gone, the clicking is not heard, and aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I'm fine. so I jump back on the snowmobile, thinking perhaps I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer to start up than usual, and I am beginning to worry. But soon it's running and I'm heading back to my town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I'm thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine or some strange northern light behavior, etc. Probably not that big of a deal. I pull up to my house, lights are all dark. Strange. It wasn't like that when I left. I open the outer doors as quietly as possible, remove my winter gear and enter the inner door. The house is quiet, really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. All I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy, as I'm soon under my covers and go set my alarm for the next day. When all of a sudden, everything made sense. Engine hard to start, stiff, rather chilly, nobody up when I was gone for what felt like a relatively short period of time. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left, and now it was creeping up to 6 a.m. I stood, staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night, and I don't go on late-night snow machine rides anymore. When I was a kid, my family planned a trip to New York. We were going to take the train all the way to New York from Oklahoma. At the time, the nearest train station was in Kansas, so we had to drive there first. We left our house in the early morning with plenty of time to make our train, which left at 9 or 10 at night. After driving all day, we made it to Kansas, but somehow got completely and hopelessly lost looking for the train station. For hours we drove on empty country roads that seemed endless. This was the 90s, and well before GPS or the average person having cell phones. All we had was a useless map, and when I say these roads were empty, I mean there was nothing. No gas station, no houses, no stores, just absolutely endless grassland as far as the eye could see. It was night now and pitch black due to the lack of street lamps, other cars or buildings. The whole area seemed completely dead and abandoned. Finally, with about 20 minutes to spare before our train left, we stumbled across an old building with a payphone inside. The building was run down and looked like it had been abandoned, but may have been a gas station at one point. My mum got out the car and called the cops for help. By now, all of us kids were crying and freaking out, afraid we would miss our train. We had never been on a train before, and we had been so excited about this trip for months. My dad was in a horrid mood, because we had driven all day long to make it on time, and we should have arrived at the station hours ago. Now we only had minutes to get help and find the station. It seemed absolutely hopeless that we would make it there on time. There was no one around, and we knew it would take the police forever to get to us, here in the middle of nowhere. That's when things got weird. My mum hung up the phone and came back to the car, and the second she got in and closed the door, a cop pulled up out of nowhere. I'm telling you, there was nothing on this road for miles and miles. There was no possible way for the police, on the phone, to have sent someone in the time it took for my mum to hang up and walk a few feet back to our car. Even if the cop had been in the area, it would have still taken a few minutes for him to get the call on his radio. I'm telling you that only seconds had passed from the moment she hung up the phone. But the cop knew all about us. He knew we'd called, that we were lost and looking for the station. He was incredibly nice and told us to follow him, and also that if we did the speed limit, we wouldn't make it. I remember that distinctly because it was not something a cop would normally say. He didn't seem like an ordinary cop at all. He seemed to know everything about our situation, almost as if he knew us personally. We followed the cop out of the deserted parking lot, and within seconds were in the train station. It seemed to appear out the darkness like a mirage. There had not been any signs pointing to it, and there was absolutely nothing else around. We made it to the train with about 10 minutes to spare, waiting for it. To this day, we still talk about it as a family, and wonder how it was possible for the cops to have gotten to us that fast on a dark, deserted country road with nothing around for miles. We also have no idea how we were so close to the train station. My mum thinks the cop was an angel, and I don't know what to think. It was one of the weirdest things I have ever experienced, and to this day I can't explain what happened, or who that cop was, or how we got to the station that night. To understand this story, you're going to need a bit of information about me. I'm a 38-year-old man from Philadelphia. Growing up, I was a real loner. I had a few close acquaintances, but nothing more than that. When I was about 11, a family from Japan moved next door, and I became fast friends with their 2 daughters, Ayumi and Shoko. They were my closest friends on the planet. They even helped me get my first girlfriend. But things started to come to an abrupt end during our senior year of high school. They broke the news that they were moving back to Japan after they graduated. There was no stopping it either. After they left, and with no real direction, I enlisted in the military. Fast forward 13 years and I'm stationed in Korea. During one of the nights out, I'm enjoying the sights and sounds when I see a familiar face. And based on the unique way he was smoking his cigarette, I quickly knew it was their father. He was there on some business trip, and we caught up and exchanged emails, and he promised to tell the family I said hello and sent my regards. A few weeks later, he emailed me with a job offer in Japan, and I jumped on it. I gave him my exit date from the military, and he got me a work visa. Things were looking up, reunited with my best friends again. But this is where the curveball comes in. Shoko picked me up from the airport in Tomaya, and she looked at me dead in the eyes. "You remember my sister Ayumi, right?" she asked. Emphatically, I replied, "Yeah, you are both my only real friends." She turned pale and hung her head, then told me she doesn't exist anymore. Confused and thinking perhaps her English was slipping after all these years of not using it, I asked, fearing she'd passed on. She said the following, and I can still remember it verbatim to this day. "I don't know what happened, but one day I woke up and she was gone. No one seems to remember her either." She took me to the apartment her family had set up for me and made me promise not to say anything to her family. I reluctantly agreed based on how hard she was pleading. That night I called my family back in the US, and I asked if they remembered anything about her and her family. They all remembered the family and Shoko, but not Ayumi. I had them send my things to me, knowing I had photos of the 3 of us in my family gatherings and parties from family events. A few weeks go by and my things came. All the photos were of me and Shoko, not a single one with Ayumi. Now I fully understand what Shoko meant when she said she didn't exist. It was like she was wiped completely from the face of the earth. So I did what any rational person would have done, and started freaking out. Me and Shoko, being the only ones to remember her, started researching things related like this. Over time we grew closer and eventually got married. We've been together 3 years now, still live in Japan, and every day we look into this further. If there is anyone out there who knows anything about this, or has any information that could be useful, you have no idea how greatly we would appreciate it. This happened a few months ago. My wife and I went to the pool in our apartment complex for an evening swim, and there was a child with his mum there. Nobody else was there or in the pool. Now this kid seemed like he was a bit off, autistic perhaps, but what was strange is when he was near us in the pool, he gave off strange vibes. So there we were in the deep end, and this kid is on a styrofoam boogie board floating around us in the same area, making weird noises and staring at us. So we decide to head to the shallow end. I swam underwater for a bit and popped up when I could touch the bottom. But what happened next is something I have never experienced. When I came up, I looked around for my wife, and she was nowhere to be found. The kid was still at the deep end floating around, and there was nobody but he and I in the pool. The kid's mum was outside the pool though. The pool lights were on, and I could clearly see the whole pool, but she wasn't there. I swear for a good 10 to 15 seconds I was looking all over the place, and suddenly behind me, she was there again, instantly. She said to me, "I couldn't find you. I thought you got out or something." So for a brief moment in time, we couldn't see each other, and neither of us had gotten out of the pool. But we were both in the shallow end, somehow. While the creepy autistic kid liked to float around in the deep end of the pool, it's not like we were back to back or anything. We would have bumped into each other or heard each other's movements in the water. Not to mention the fact that I spun around a few times looking for her. Honestly, we still can't figure it out. This is my dad's story, and he shared it with me when I was about 10 or 11. When he was around 22, he was out of town visiting some friends around 30 miles from where his parents lived. Being the kind of person who was a clean freak, he hated having stubble and a beard of any kind. So he called his parents from his friend's house phone and said he'd be back in around 45 minutes or so and then hung up. Now, he said that the faster route was on a country road that skipped out any major dual carriageways, and after around 20 minutes of driving and around 5 minutes after getting onto this country road, he said he saw an incredibly bright white light and thought it was a broken down car in a side road. He got out of the car and investigated, but the white light promptly got brighter, then vanished. At this point, he was crapping himself, so he jumped back in his car and concentrated on the road ahead, and finally got home. As he got into the driveway of his parents' house, they ran outside to him crying and hugging him as he was getting out of the car. Being incredibly confused, he asked them what happened. They told him that after he called them, they were waiting for him to get home, but he didn't get home that night. Apparently, it had been 3 days since his phone call. After calming down and calming his parents down, he went to his bedroom and glanced at himself in the mirror. As he walked past it, he had a freaking stubbly beard on the go. To this very day, no one knows what happened that night, and his family hate talking about it. I used to work in music and toured with this band. The guitarist, called Josh, of the band, had a best friend called Matt who died a few years back. He always talked about the kid and seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street, which supposedly was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dream, Matt would take a bulb from the street light on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They are huge Bright Eyes fans and wanted to stop in Cassadaga, Florida, as the Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there, and it's a really creepy and spiritual place. It might be worth noting that 6 out of 7 of the people I was with are all atheists. So we drive into Cassadaga about 2 or 3 a.m. and drive around. Suddenly this black dog comes into the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guy in the band were all weirded out and were just saying things like, "Follow the dog, it's trying to show us something." And in my mind I'm thinking, these guys are idiots. We follow the dog for a few blocks, and it was just walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden, we turn a street and the dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says, "Stop the van. This is it." We're all confused. He gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dream. We hang out for about 15 minutes, and the way he described the street, from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely a street. The one from the dream. As we get in the van, a street light goes off and we just drive off. He claimed he never had any more dreams about it, and it was closure on everything. In college, I frequented a trail in the Appalachian Mountains near my college. Each time I would trek further and further, I never saw anyone on it, no matter how good the weather was. So, I just saw it as my own personal trail. For a while, I would walk to a large stream and turn back since it was wide and deep, and I didn't want to get my boots soaking wet. One day I was determined to cross the stream, so I moved several planks of sturdy dead tree to make a makeshift bridge. I crossed to the other side and everything felt subtly different. The air was different, the sky brighter, and surprisingly the trail on the other side was much better maintained than the part I'd come from. As I kept walking, I was noticing a lot of old soda cans lying around, the ones that are more perfectly cylindrical. I wasn't seeing any of the modern-looking soda can designs. I passed an old cabin. It was occupied, so I didn't bother investigating and went along my way. I kept walking until I got to a wider, deeper stream. I wouldn't be able to make a bridge to cross that though, so I turned around and headed back. I distinctly remember the sky turning overcast within a few minutes. I couldn't clearly see the sky since the trees blocked a lot of my view. I had just assumed a cloud had passed across the sun, but when I got a better look, the sky was completely different. It felt like I was walking along a completely different trail. This is the craziest part. I looked over to where the cabin had been to find nothing but the remains of the cabin. All that was left was the stone chimney. I had walked by the cabin an hour back, but there weren't any ashes or any smoke. There was a thick layer of fallen leaves and even some litter, modern litter like beer bottles and cans with modern logos. I was dumbfounded and explored the cabin's remains for a good hour, until it began to drizzle. I walked back along the trail. The old soda cans were gone. The bridge I had built was gone. I couldn't see the logs further downstream. The rest of the trail was just as I had remembered it. I walked the last mile or so of the trail in darkness and rain, guided by my phone, which never could get reception up in the mountains. So that's my weird time-traveling story. I made a point of wanting to get back to my college town so that I could revisit the trail and see what's on the other side of the second big stream. If anyone lives nearby, I'd love to hear what you can find in the rest of the park loop. When I was 18, my mother kicked me out the house after she caught me drinking. I moved in with my estranged father, who lived in a 200-year-old house on the coast of western Michigan. In the kitchen was a door to the basement, where he had a studio that he spent most of his time in. He's a painter. And from the living room you could see around the archway and most of the kitchen. Anyway, I was sitting on the couch reading and listening to the radio when the DJ announced the date, July 2nd, the day before my grandmother's birthday. I looked up and saw my father in the kitchen wearing an old red and blue Pistons hat and matching windbreaker and pants, an outfit that I hadn't seen him in ages. I called him and asked him if he had any plans for Grandma's birthday, because we hadn't discussed it yet. He had a stunned look on his face and seemingly backed up and disappeared. His reaction was a bit bizarre, but I wrote it off immediately, as he smokes a lot of green and sometimes acts strange or avoids me when he's a bit too into it. I got off the couch in an attempt to follow him, but when I made it to the kitchen he was gone. The basement door was shut and locked, but I hadn't heard the door close. A few hours pass and he comes back upstairs to make himself some dinner. I was a little ticked that he ignored me, and being young, I rushed into the kitchen for scolding him for being rude earlier. I asked him why he wouldn't answer me when I asked him about Grandma's birthday, and told him that she should be more important to him, and him not responding made me very upset. He looked confused and told me he hadn't come home all day, that he just got back and came in through the outside door to the basement to carry some art supplies, before coming up and making dinner. I was about to call him a liar when I noticed his outfit was completely different. A ratty old white t-shirt, black sweatpants and a black baseball cap. I asked him why he'd changed his clothes. A little freaked out, but he told me he hadn't. I described what he was wearing when I saw him earlier, and he said that he threw the windbreaker and pants out about 10 years ago. It was his favorite outfit back in the day, and showed me what was left of the hat I was describing. It was practically falling apart in a drawer in his bedroom, which of course meant whatever it was I saw earlier was not my father. I must have had hundreds of spooky stories from living in that house, but this one really sticks with me. It was the early 2000s. It's 3 a.m. and my house phone starts ringing. The phone was on the other side of the room. I stand up on the bed and start heading for the low dresser to answer it, and my wife gets up to get the phone as well. By this time it's at the third ring, and I remember thinking, crap, it's going to go to voicemail. The ringing stops. My cell phone starts ringing, and I immediately change gears to someone really needs to get a hold of me. I grab my phone, and the caller ID is just 0000, lots of them. I answer, hello? And a voice comes through the line, as though it were a distant overseas call, parting through the static and asking, is this Joel? To which I replied, yes, who is this? Immediately, it was as though those words, is this Joel, were being pulled back through the line, echoing in reverse. There was static, and the call dropped. Jump forward several years. I'm installing a phone system, and we're joking around that it's so advanced, it could place calls back in time. I punch in my old phone number and call it, realizing the number is still active and that my wife may answer. I hang up and call my now years old and retired phone number. Someone answers. I freak out and ask, is this Joel? The voice on the other end of the line answers, through space and time, yes, who is this? At that instant, I immediately remember taking that call, and I am struck dumb. I cannot speak without thinking. I reflexively pressed the hang-up button. I'm now freaked out. I look over to my colleague who isn't as freaked out as I am. From his perspective, I called a number, and someone had the same number and answered. But he realized that was my voice on the other end of the line. I told him, I got that call. It was 5 years ago, but I got that call. Then we both freak out. I hit redial and get a message that the number is no longer in service. I call my home back and my wife answers. I tell her I'm testing a phone system and ask if she had any previous calls. Nope, none. I'm kind of freaking out, but with her on speakerphone I ask her, hey, do you remember that 3 a.m. call we got all those years back? Yeah? Where I asked, is this Joel, and the line went dead? Yeah? I'm just looking at my colleague with my wife still on speaker. Do you remember what year that was? It was before we had kids, so it would have had to have been around 2002 time frame. I don't know how to say this, but I'm pretty sure it was me that called. I'm not a superstitious or generally spiritual person, but in high school, I was in the drum line, and we practiced early in the morning prior to starting school. We were inside the band room that day because it was fairly cold. So anyway, I'm doing my thing playing the tenors, and I drop one of my mallets. I turn to pick it up and can't find it. There is about 10 feet of open bare floor surrounding me, and it's nowhere to be found. My instructor stops us and basically just asks me what the problem is. So several of us start searching around but can't find it. I say screw it, grab my spare set, and about 20 minutes later the band director walks in and locks his office, sits on his desk, and knocks on the window. I look up, and he picks up the mallet from his desk with a look like, what is this doing here? I could verify that it was mine because I marked each set. Nobody had gone in or out. There's no gap under the door, it's a locked room, and it somehow ended up on the desk? There were 15 of us in that room at the time, and there was a unanimous nope at that moment. I was stunned, and one of my buddies became unglued. We pretty much cancelled the rest of the rehearsal right there and then, and many of us were pretty bugged out about the rest of the day. I couldn't concentrate on anything for almost a week after that. Eventually my brain just filed it away under unsolved mysteries, and we ended up carrying on with life. I remember this like it was yesterday, because for me it was. It was July 22nd, 2011. I had just gotten married to my beautiful wife at the beginning of the month. I was 34 years old. Have you ever wrote your thoughts down knowing you're legally dead? Neither have I until now. Like I said, it was July 2011. I had only been married a few weeks. One day while my wife took a nap, I decided to take a walk. Right across from my house across the street is nothing but woods. According to Google Earth, the woods go on for a while. I may have been walking about half an hour to 45 minutes when I heard a noise. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or Bigfoot, and I'm not worried about other people because I always have a knife or gun on me. I'm not scared easy. The noise I heard wasn't like a twig snapping, leaves crunching or rocks falling. It was more like a splash. So I followed the sound and it led me to a small clearing. I saw a creek, but the water wasn't clear like you normally see. Instead it was a light greenish color. It had a glow and fog rose from it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Only in horror or sci-fi movies perhaps. As I was looking at the creek and all of its wonders, I heard the splash again. I followed the sound with my eyes and saw a downed tree. I saw part of a person's left hand. I immediately ran over and dropped to my knees to help this guy, and what I saw sticks with me to this day. As the guy raised his head in what I thought was to take a breath, he cut his eyes at me, halfway still in the water, and a smile formed on his face. Just as fast as I saw him, he was gone and disappeared into the air, gone, no trace of him at all. Then, in what I'm guessing was about an hour, I woke up. I know you're thinking it must have all been a dream, but just wait. I was still in the same spot I fell asleep in. I'd jump up, still feeling a bit dazed, and walk home. A million things were running through my mind, knowing my wife wasn't going to believe what just happened to me. I knew I was going to be in trouble. I finally made it home and tried to open the door, but my keys wouldn't work. Okay, that's weird, I thought. Suddenly a guy opens the door and asks, "Can I help you?" Keep in mind I'd never seen this guy before. I asked him who he was, and why he was in my house, where my wife was. Looking confused, he answered, "Son, we've lived in this house for 8 years. We moved in 2011. Even more confused, I asked, "What do you mean, 2011? My wife and I bought this house earlier this month." About this time, a woman walked up to him. I could only assume it was his wife, and whispered something into his ear. About the same time, a cop was pulling into the driveway. I'm guessing that's what she was telling him, and that she had called the police. They took my wallet, knife and gun and placed it on the hood of the squad car. The police questioned me, and the other guy, separately, comparing our stories in just as such confusion as we'd had. The other guy gave the police all the proper paperwork to prove his side and was released to go back into his home. All the attention was then turned on me. I told them I wasn't crazy, to just look at my wallet. I told them I had my ID and to look at the serial number on my gun. Neither would lie. They opened my wallet and laid everything out. There was nothing there but old newspaper clippings about nothing in particular. No ID. The serial number on the gun came back clean. It wasn't stolen, but there was also no name to the owner either. Frustrated, I told them to look. It had been a long day. "You can just drive me to my father-in-law's house, and he'll clear this up," I told them. The police officers looked at each other, then back at me and said, "Sure." And 15 minutes later we were pulling into my father-in-law's driveway. A smile came across my face, and I breathed a sigh of relief, like a brick had just been taken off my chest. Everything was as I explained it to the officers, and soon everything was going to be okay. One of the officers knocked on my father-in-law's door to talk to him, and the other officer and I waited outside. A few minutes later, the officer and my father-in-law walked out to join us. My father-in-law looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Sir, this officer just told me everything that's going on. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't know you. I did have a daughter, but she died in a car accident 4 years ago. She'd never been married, nor had children. I don't know how you know these things about me, or what kind of sick game this is, but you need to leave." My heart sank. What in the world was going on? The officer apologized, thanked him for his time, and I asked where we were going, to which they replied, "The station," to try and figure this out. I begged them for one last try, to please call my dad. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be him. I gave him my dad's information, his name and number, the whole 9 yards. They pulled over, called him and told him everything. I could hear my dad yelling. He definitely wasn't happy, and he too thought this was nothing but a sick joke. He screamed, "I have no idea who this guy is or how he knows me. The only son I ever had, my ex miscarried over 30 years ago. I suffered with that loss daily, and this is just sick and twisted." There were a few choice words thrown in as well before he hung up on the officer. So I sit here now, as nothing more than John Doe. I'm not writing this thinking anyone will believe me, because no one else has. I'm writing in the hopes that the right person will hear this and know who I am and how it happened. I live in a condominium, and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase, and enter the other one. One night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs, and my mum told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer. So we took the keys to the 7th floor apartment, and since it was dinner time, there was no one there. I walked in the pitch dark and realized someone was sitting on the sofa. So I flipped the switch to see my dad sitting there. It was kind of weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have one. I went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked him how the hell he got up here so fast, and everyone gave me a strange look and told me that he had been here the entire time. I told them it wasn't possible because I had just seen him downstairs, and no one believed me. I will now never go back down there alone. Just to make everything quite clear, each of our apartment doors are fitted with 3 types of locks. There's a gate which has its own keyhole and lock. We put another lock in it so that you have to unlock this gate twice, and then there's a door and its own lock. So you need 3 keys just to enter our house if no one is inside. I did get a good look, and it was 100% my father. He's kind of fat and has a serious looking face, so it's hard to mistake him. The apartments are not accessible because not only are they not on the same floor, they aren't even located on top of each other. There's an elevator in between them, and they are on different floors. So there's no way for anyone to go up or down without first meeting at the elevator or the staircase. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the Great Pacific Northwest, the Western Washington Cascades to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing and hunting. There are parts of the Cascades I know like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Index Galima Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that when cut in half polished would resemble a scenic picture of the view of the mountains from within a cave. I do not recall the true name of the stone, we just called them picture rocks. My father's friend and neighbour owned an art gallery / mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way up from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, You might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at the creek, I had only ever seen 2 other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshot from our target practicing session and tracked us down to make sure everything was fine. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised, as we would, running into anyone in this rather remote section of the mountains. But as I got closer to this man as he was standing down near the creek and I heading up the road, he seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me something. After I passed him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking, and I continued on to the truck, dumped my load of rocks off at the truck and headed back down to the river with my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he had not. I have remembered this encounter quite vividly since then. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to visit up Old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been about 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up, I found out that the Index Galima Road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew of another way up, via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park, and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that shook me to my core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. And as we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked, as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at that moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped, when it all really hit me. I remember both the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived the other half of that experience. Both the man and the boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick, western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up the road to where my truck was, to find nothing. There wasn't anyone else there besides the road for him to go down, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch him up. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down to the creek half, expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank, 15 years younger, but found no one. I ended up going home, and decided that this experience was too unbelievable to even tell my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out to this wonderful community, to see what others thought, and hopefully know if anyone has had any kind of experience like this as well. I was a sophomore in high school, at my girlfriend's house watching a movie. It was around 10 p.m. when the flick ended, and I proceeded to skateboard home, as I only lived 2 blocks away and it was a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm skating down the hill towards a larger street, larger but never really busy, especially not at night. When I reached the intersection, I nail a rock. I had planned on blasting across the street since there were no cars coming in either direction. I fly off the board, skid a good 3 to 4 feet on my head, right shoulder, hip and knee. I rolled to my back and screamed out in agony. The pain was so bad I couldn't really move. I looked up the road about 30 yards off, and a car is coming straight down the way. And where I landed, I was right in its path, 2-lane street. I was right in the middle of his lane, my head aligned with the wheel. I tried like hell to move and scream but couldn't do anything. The car was 15 yards off. He didn't see me, made no attempt to swerve. 10 yards. I heard him barreling down and I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. Nothing. I opened my eyes, looked where the car had been. Nothing. Hear the car behind me. Look where it was supposed to be in the other direction. Tail lights cruising up the road. I hadn't moved. He hadn't swerved. It was like he passed through me. Or I passed through him. There isn't really any way he could have passed over me. Not with the way I had landed, and I was positioned in the street. It was a little car. I can't explain it. I got up terrified, bloodied and baffled, hobbled home, and went to sleep. No one believed me, but it's true. My husband and I moved into a new house last year. COVID really did us dirty, and various less than ideal scenarios meant our savings took a huge hit. So we made the decision to move outside of the city. Cheaper rent, bigger space, a garden for the first time, all the good stuff. Since we moved in, there has been a really weird feeling, and I believe that, looking back, I have experienced a few odd things already. I have overlooked and tried to rationalize them away. The only thing I can't deny, though, happened earlier this week. I am still working from home while my husband is back in the office, so I am at home most of the day on my own. I have gotten used to this new routine over time, and honestly I'm pretty happy with working at home and the peace and quiet. It allows me to get other things done around the house during my breaks, and cutting out the commute has been a godsend, especially now that we're outside the city. Because of this new routine, I've gotten used to having a new sixth sense around timings of the day and when I can expect my husband to come home, usually around 7:30. The night this happened, I clocked off work early and decided to take a shower since it was hair wash day. Thick hair, friends, know how much prep this takes. My husband often comes home when I'm showering and usually announces himself as to not scare me. For a bit of context, our house is super old, English terraced, which means it's long and thin and tall. When we moved in, the landlord had just renovated the bathroom that's located right at the top of the stairs by adding a new freestanding shower ensuite. Basically, if you're standing in the shower with the door open, you can look right down the stairs and down the hallway with a clear view of the front door. When I'm home alone, I often shower with the door open to mitigate the scare I will inevitably get when my husband comes home and bumbles up the stairs. When my husband gets home, he always announces himself as he comes through the front door, usually something along the lines of, "It's just me." From the bathroom to the angle of the stairs means I can only see to the knees of whoever's standing directly at the front door. My husband knows this and always bends down so that he can wave his hands up the stairs. If he hears the shower, that is. So while I'm standing in the shower listening to the rattle of keys in the front door, I become consciously aware that it's much too early for him to be home yet, since I'd clocked off work early and it was only 4:30. While I'm freaking out and staring wide-eyed down the stairs, my husband comes through the door. I see his feet, with his familiar grey suit and dress shoes. He announces himself in his distinctive deep voice and bends down to wave. I see his hand angled up and a quick flash at the top of his blonde hair. Relief. He must be home early. Only he wasn't home early. After I relax, I look away to finish shampooing, and after about a minute later when I noticed that I'd never heard the front door close, and that I never heard the sound of his heavy feet on the wooden floor, or the loud thump of him dropping his work backpack on the floor before going into the kitchen. I peeked back down the stairs and everything was as I'd left it before showering. No bag, no work shoes, nothing. Everything was normal, except that my husband hadn't come home, despite the fact I'd seen him do it. Naturally, I freaked. Even though I checked the door and it was locked internally, I still went through the whole house with a kitchen knife in case, yet nothing was out of place. I sat on the sofa in silence for about 2 hours before he finally arrived home and went through his routine, the very routine that I'd already seen him do that evening. I never told him about this, and the other goings-on that I've remembered with the gift of hindsight. I know he wouldn't believe me. He's as skeptical as they come, and I don't want him to freak out that I'm suddenly seeing things. "12 years ago, I lived across the street from a church and a few blocks away from a library. I lived in a townhome right next door to a 72-year-old woman. I believe it's important to note a few things before I detail some of the concerns I have while living on Joshua Street. I now live on the other side of the country. Thankfully, Joshua Street is located somewhere in the high desert of California. I never had audio hallucinations leading up to the point where I moved there, nor did I ever hear anything out of the ordinary after I moved across the state. The 72-year-old woman I lived next to was a very sound mind and able-bodied. She never once showed even a moment of mental fogginess. She had lived around the area for a long time, was retired, and left her house often. Her name was Hannah. The library had no alterations made to the building, or any that were made public or immediately noticeable whilst I was living there, and I went past it every morning on my commute. The church in question was modern, with no church bells, not inside, not outside, no bell tower, no bell speakers, no clock tower, nothing. It was not a loud church. So anyway, on to the story. Joshua Street was a typical looking area for the dry, arid locale. We had no grass in our front yard, more like a cracked, sandy, clay-like turf, with Joshua trees and other desert shrubs and plants scattered around my area. The townhome was less than luxurious, but no matter how loud I played music or shows, or how loud my neighbors were, we could not hear each other, which was a plus. Hannah was a kind woman who I enjoyed talking to in the mornings, and sometimes came over to her home to have a tea and listen to her stories. A month into living at Joshua Street, I decided to move furniture around so that the couch was up against the wall that separated Hannah's townhouse from mine. Originally, my bookshelves were there, and I wanted to watch TV from a different angle of the house. This wasn't an issue during late night, but during the day I noticed some strange sounds while sitting on the couch. I went to my bedroom on the other side of the room that shared the same back wall, and there was no sound. I looked over all the house for a source, and I eventually figured that it might be coming from the other side of the wall. Although Hannah is very quiet, I never received any noise complaints from her, nor did she tell me that she could hear anything when I played my music loudly, as I asked her to be polite, because this woman was old but certainly not deaf. Eventually I figured I should put my ear to the wall behind the couch. Clearly I could hear what sounded like church bells ringing. Needless to say, it creeped me out. Now I'm not religious, I'm agnostic, so I didn't really know that much about churches. I thought it was strange that I could only hear the sound of bells from the wall, and not when I went outside to see if it came from the church. I shrugged it off, and decided to ask Hannah about it next morning. The next day, I asked Hannah if I could come inside for tea, and she was happy to have me over. I took note that her TV was nowhere near the wall that separated our homes, nor any other kind of audio or radio equipment. This is because her kitchen is a part of that wall. I told Hannah about the bells I heard through the wall, and she told me she had no idea where the sound would be coming from. I asked her if she was watching televangelists or wedding shows, or had an alarm clock or loud timer, although I didn't really believe that the sound I could have heard could have come from any of those things. This is when phones were not high-tech, and didn't really have the capability to make high-definition sounds. She said that she didn't watch anything of the sort, nor did she have an alarm clock. She joked about after living so long, you just wake up around the same time every day. And she said something that bothered me. She said that there used to be an old church on the same lot, and that the land was smaller than the current one. The modern church is very large, you see, and this old one had church bells, but she never heard any church bells since then. She informed me the church was rebuilt in the 90s, and she thought that maybe I was dozing off on the couch and had dreamt of the church across the street. I went along with it and returned home. The third night after hearing the bells, I decided I would go across the street to visit the church. At this point I was pretty curious about it. 3 nights in a row, and I found it would be at 6 p.m. every day. Mind you, at the time I had no idea about the significance of the time. I would watch TV when I got home at around 6, and I would hear something faint and put my ear up against the wall. Gong. And I would listen up until either it creeped me out or it suddenly stopped. I visited the church at around 5:45 and stayed there until 6:30. I didn't really want to be a part of the service, so as much as I wanted to listen for anything that sounded like the bells at home. Of course, there was no such sounds, and after asking the staff there about the history of the church, they told me the same thing Hannah did, and they also said they never decided to implement speakers or bells into the new building. Over the weekends, I began to notice other sounds through the wall, including the familiar bell sound. The bell would sound around lunchtime too, and eventually, I figured out this bell would sound at 12 p.m. as well. This is from my journal. The bells sound at 12 now. I wonder if there is any significance to this, or maybe I'm just going crazy. 12 and 6. And now I'm hearing creepy music box sounds. Maybe I should just tell someone about it. They'd probably think I'm mad. Back in 07, a lot more people were going to libraries to do mundane things that many people today just do on their phones in bed. I didn't own a personal computer, and the Razr flip phone had terrible internet capabilities that you had to pay extra for. So I went to my local library with my journal and decided to do some research there. I quickly found that the church bells are traditionally rung at 6 a.m., 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. At this point, I wanted nothing to do with the town I lived in. A few weeks ago, my friend's dad told me a pretty bizarre story that scarred me for life. About 15 years ago, my friend's parents, Michael and Julia, were woken up at 1 a.m. by a very loud thud that rattled the house. Worried that one of the kids had fallen out of the bunk bed, Michael went downstairs to check on them, but the kids were sound asleep and safe in their beds. Julia told Michael to check the house in case of intruders, and Michael checked the doors and windows before going to take a look outside. After about 10 minutes of investigating, he found nothing unusual and went back inside to go to bed. He found his wife absolutely worried sick and demanded to know where the hell he'd been and what happened. Confused and tired, Michael told her he found nothing and tried to calm her down, before she pointed out it was now 4 a.m. and that he had been missing for 3 hours. She had even gone outside to check on him, and he was nowhere to be found and didn't respond to her calling his name. Unable to figure out what happened, they returned to bed and slept until Michael had to get up for work a few hours later. Michael owns a painting business, and a few hours after working on this house, he notices his eyes start to feel itchy. Then his eyes start to burn. Then after a few hours his eyes burned so badly he was holding his eyelids open to not blink because it felt like his lids were sandpaper against his eyes. His employees rushed him to hospital, and Michael was treated for second-degree flash burns on his eyes. He was told his burns were the equivalent of staring at welder torches without eye protection for an extended period of time. His eyes were treated, and he was lucky to have his vision fully restored. He is one of the most stand-up guys I know, and the way he told this story gave me the creeps. Dead serious and no explanation for what happened. His wife was there too, and she was visibly upset when he was telling me that story. I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was in the car park of a pub in England, Southend. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked me who I was waving to and I just said some lady in the window over there. Didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years, I was at my grandma's house. I remember walking into her room, which I was never allowed to do, and going to the window. I then realized I was in the house looking over that same parking lot. I'm remembering their interaction years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10 who was in said car park waved at me and I waved back, and I felt like I knew her. Could not explain it, and I've never told it to anyone, but it still freaks me out. I was 14 in the year 2007. It was the fourth semester of my grade 9 year. I was so excited to finish the semester, as I had a Christmas vacation to look forward to during the break. It was all I thought about. I didn't have much to look forward to in life at the time, as I'm a very shy kid who didn't have many friends, and my high school experience was only just beginning, so I didn't have many opportunities to engage with my peers in a meaningful way. So being the shy kid, I just fantasized about this vacation all day, every day. December finally comes, and it's time to go to Florida. My immediate family and I gathered all of our aunts, uncles, and cousins to take part in a huge drive from Windsor, Ontario to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where about 25 to 30 of my relatives rented a massive, and I mean massive, beach home to stay in for our week-long vacation. The drive was approximately 2 days long, and we stopped to sleep in between, but I didn't mind. I wanted to get there. I didn't care how long it took. We arrived at the house and the fun ensued immediately. We played games, watched movies, swam in the pool, joked and laughed. It was a great time. It was the week going into 2008 New Year, so that was just another thing to celebrate. My family is loud and rambunctious, so this energy was welcomed for my shy self. Now, this is where the thing happened. I was sharing a room with my younger cousin James. When he and I were not playing video games in our room late at night together, we would tell stories, talk about life, and get excited for the adventures to come on our vacation. We headed to bed this night, and fell asleep just fine. But in the middle of the night, I wake up groggy, tired, and sort of confused. I heard my cousin James rustling around in his bed, and get up in a hurry. I didn't think much of it besides how frantically he opened the door and ran into the hall. The hall light was on, and everyone was awake. Weird. It wasn't New Year's or anything. It wasn't like he was running to see the ball drop. What was weird was that he was saying there was a huge noise coming from the entire house blaring on the smoke alarm. I didn't hear it at all, so this confused me. I get up and meet my sister Megan, and my other cousin Catherine standing on the balcony worried and scared about the noise blaring through the whole house in the middle of the night. All of them were so scared, but I couldn't hear a sound. Not at all. I was standing next to my cousins and sisters asking what was going on, telling them I couldn't hear it. They looked shocked. I yelled down to my dad and uncles, who were shuffling in a panic trying to turn off the blaring sound, and I asked what's going on. "Don't you hear the sound?" "No," I reply. I couldn't understand the commotion. I almost floated back to bed, like a listless walk without any life, and curled back to sleep. Perhaps it was a dream. The next morning I asked everyone what happened, and they said, well, the smoke alarm tripped up. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that wasn't a dream. Surely it had to be a dream, because the frightening panic that was felt by everyone being disturbed by the sound, and I didn't hear a thing, yet I was there. Wasn't I? I asked my dad, and he said that I actually never was, that I never woke up from my sleep. He said I slept through the whole thing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was there. I asked questions about the sound, I said. To this day my family still claims, my entire family, that I was not awake during the ordeal when they were fumbling around to turn off the alarm. It still confuses me to this day, and I spent the rest of the trip in a confused state trying to put the pieces together. But I just couldn't. Did I actually sleep through it? But It felt so real. I remember getting up and asking what all the ruckus was about, asking my dad about the sound. But no one said I was awake. Was I astral projecting? Was that why I couldn't hear the sound? Or was it a glitch? Perhaps I'll never know. I live in a house with just my mum and my 2 sisters. We get on quite well. The house is fairly new and built in a decent area. So, onto the story. I was just chilling, watching some cartoons, and both my sisters were out. It was just me and my mum at home. My mum was probably working in the other room, as I could hear her furiously typing away on her laptop while having a conference call via her phone. I was just chilling and thought I'd get up and get a snack, as Mum hadn't even considered making dinner yet, and it was already getting late into the afternoon. Come to think of it, my sisters had probably gone out to eat somewhere. Anyway, I was just in the kitchen getting a snack, when my mum opens the front door with shopping in hand, and my 2 sisters right behind her. I look over at them, incredibly confused. I swear my mum was just in the other room. How the hell was she coming back with car keys in hand and groceries in another, and my sisters in tow? I give them a confused look, and they walk straight past me and set the things down on the counter. And then, the creepiest thing of all. They were there, and then in a split second, like in a blink, it's all gone. The door is closed, the stuff they placed on the counter is gone, and there's no one here but me. I shout my mum's name and hear her reply, "I'm on the phone." That was really weird, I thought. I run up to the door and it's still locked. I go over to where my mum is, and she's still on the phone and giving me a confused and slightly annoyed tone. One that says, "What do you want? Can't you see I'm busy?" I collect myself, sit down on the sofa, and try to pretend that that never happened. I'd never told anyone before because I thought for a few moments I was going insane. I never did have that snack. Where I live, there's a train that goes from my school to my home. The distance between those stations is about 15 minutes. One day my friend and I left school together and boarded the train. We were both getting off at the same stop. Let's just say the station at the train is station 1 and our home is station 5. The distance between each station is about 3 minutes. We boarded at 3 p.m. and chat. I've taken this train more than 100 times before, meaning we know how long it takes, what our stop looks like, etc. Even the train announcer announces the stations as well. We constantly look outside for scenery to tell us it's our stop, and keep checking our watches and the stations we're at. We continue chatting, and then as usual we get off the train. We exit, turn right, and take the escalator down, and it's not there. Confused, we give a quick look around and notice we're not at station 5, we're at station 8. No problem, we just sat past it, right? So we checked our watch. 3:15. Both him and I have never been able to deduce what happened. The time needed to reach station 8 would have been at least 10 more minutes. The train itself is automatic, so the distance and time never need to change. We take the opposite train and discuss what happened. We both saw the last station the train announced was station 4, and was at the scenery we saw a million times over passing by a school we always used as our landmark. Up to this day I can't find a reasonable explanation of what happened, and it still creeps me out to this day. I had a friend in high school called Bob. He was very nice, and while we weren't that close, we had similar tastes in music and we shared CDs. This was in the late 80s and way before file sharing. We eventually graduated and I moved several hundreds of miles away to college and we lost touch. When I left for college, I had one of Bob's CDs still in my possession, Beat by King Crimson. Fast forward 10 years and I graduated college and was knee-deep in my career and finally saved up enough money and bought my first house. In the new house, while I was unpacking, I see the CD in the box. I hadn't noticed it in many years and thought, gee, I really should track down Bob and return this. Then, at that moment, the doorbell rings. It's Bob, and he says, hey, you wouldn't happen to still have my King Crimson CD, would you? I'm looking down and holding it in my hand. I hand it to him, and his mouth drops open. Mine probably already is. We exchange pleasantries. I ask him how he found me, but can't remember his answer anymore, and he eventually takes off. Haven't seen Bob since. When I was around 13 or 14, I had a dream that me and my mum were in Holland in a hotel to see my stepdad's daughter, and when they were checking into the hotel, I saw my mum, but in the dream I couldn't see my stepdad John. I mean, from the back it looked like him, but when he turned around there was someone else there when I woke up. A few weeks later, me, my mum and my stepdad John went to Holland to see his two daughters. So we checked into the hotel, bearing in mind I told no one about the dream because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. So we were checking into the hotel, and there I was standing. I saw everyone. It was exactly the same as my dream. I thought I saw John, my stepdad, but it wasn't him. And when the guy turned around, it was the same man from the dream. I got the biggest chills, and it was the most surreal feeling of my life. Me and my friend were at a Chinese restaurant. We ordered a General Tso chicken and a shrimp lo mein. When we sat down, we took out our boxes and set them on the table about 2 feet apart. My friend opened the first box and sees a shrimp lo mein dish. It had all the things in there, noodles, shrimp, fried rice. He closes it and opens the other box. Inside is another shrimp lo mein dish, shrimp, noodles, fried rice. Oh, I think they must have mixed the order. I was just about to say this when my friend says out loud, look, they made a mistake and gave us two. He opens the first box again. Inside is a General Tso chicken dinner order. White rice, egg roll. He froze and looked at me, and I looked back at him. We sat there in silence. It took us 5 minutes or so to collect ourselves. Neither of us have any idea how the hell that happened. I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and my mum walks by, and I say, hey, and she just walked into her room. A few minutes later, she walks through the front door with groceries, as she had just gotten home from the store. Someone please tell me what the hell just happened. There's no way my mum was there 1 second and arrived later. I just can't get my head around it. I was on my way to the choir performance I had in a town on the other side of the country. I had to catch the sound check session because if you're not there, you don't perform later. Rules of the choir. I'm running a little late, so I'm driving just a bit over the speed limit, around 80. But the road is almost completely empty, so I figured it was okay, even though it was raining quite heavily. When I was merging onto the highway, I overtook a car that kind of stuck out from the rest. It was a dark green Rover with a Bosnian license plate, which is very rare in my country, and a little sticker in the back that looked like a logo of a fight club or school. It's a very specific combination. I'm driving on the right lane when a dark green Rover passes me. It caught my attention because I was driving pretty fast, and I wanted to see who was in such a hurry to overtake me, as I was overtaking every other driver I encountered on my way so far. Okay, so the guy just caught up to me and passed me. I don't know why, but I remembered the last 3 numbers of his plate, and I still do. A couple of kilometers down the road, I see a pair of lights approaching in my rear mirror. so I moved to the right again. When it passes, it was the same car, same plates, same sticker, same brand, and same color. And then it happened 2 more times. The last time was a bit freaky. I saw someone beginning to pass me and I thought, "Hello, Rover," and there he was. 2 of the times it happened on a stretch that had no stops or exits, so I don't know how it occurred, and never once did I overtake him except at the beginning. But here comes the good part. I'm driving back from the concert. It's pretty late and the rain is pouring like hell, so visibility was bad. I was slowly driving home, and this same car passes me twice. I tried to snap a picture, as I was now expecting it the second time, but the first time freaked me the hell out. But due to the rain and bad phone, it didn't add up very well. All in all, the same car passed me 6 times. I went camping with my buddy when we were 15 or so. We walked down from his family camper to sneak a cigarette in the field at the front of the campground. While standing there, we saw a light in the sky moving, erratically, in all directions really fast, very slow, and everything in between. Fascinating. We finished our smoke and headed back to the camper. As we walked up, his mother came racing out to us, absolutely irate, frightened. She said they had been looking for us for 3 hours. They had checked the field that we were in, and we weren't there. In our minds, we hadn't been gone more than 15 minutes. We lost 3 hours of our life and never found out how or why, and never got to the bottom of it. This happened to me in 3rd grade, and it scared me so much I started crying and had to go to the office to talk to the principal about it. I was in the hallway for misbehaving, and my neighbor Tad, a year younger than me, came out of class to my right, passed in front of me and headed down some stairs. We said hi to each other, and about 20 seconds later, he walked out of the same class, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. I just stared at him, confused and afraid, and he looked back like, "Why the hell are you looking at me like that?" I never realized how much of a Matrix deja vu it was. I've also got a second example of this. A few years after this incident, my sister and I were hanging in the living room watching TV. We both saw our mum walk through the other room and through the adjacent hall. 20 minutes later, she came in from the backyard. My sister and I looked at each other confused and asked how she got back outside. She didn't know what we were talking about. She'd been outside for hours. No one else was home, of course. I think I was around 16-ish, and I was hanging out at a friend's house. It was normal for me to be over there hanging out, even if my friend and I weren't actually hanging out together. So I was wandering around the back of their house and I found a little door behind a set of hedges. Not like a tiny fairy door, but like a crawl space access square door. The funny thing was, it was not at ground level, but about 3 feet off the ground. I had been in this backyard before and been all over this house, and the door should not be there. If I went in, it would open up in the brick wall of the garage that had been converted into a small workshop room, and there was no door from the inside. But being a curious girl, I pried the door open and looked in. It was a dark and sealed up room. The floor, which looked like it was dirt, but there were a few pieces of furniture inside, against the far wall, which was the front of the house. A table/workbench which was set up with 2 chairs neatly tucked under it, and I also remembered a dresser, or an armory, turned around so the drawers faced the wall. There was also some cardboard boxes, and odds and ends scattered around, but everything had years of dust coating it. So with it being dark as coal, it was hard to tell what was what, but there was something written on the wall above the workbench. It was 2 words, and I'm certain the first word was jacket, and the second word was something that looked like free. I reached inside and felt for a light switch, but couldn't feel one, although I did see a bare bulb hanging down. I noticed my hands were covered in dust from the wall. I thought about it and considered not crawling inside, as I lacked a flashlight and wanted to tell someone so they could help me in. I left the door open and ran back inside to get my friend. He didn't believe me, but he still followed me outside. When we got to the backyard, I peeled back the hedge, and it was gone. The door just simply wasn't there anymore, and I knew exactly where it had been, but it refused to re-exist for me. My friend wandered back inside, and while I ran around the house a few more times looking everywhere for the damn portal, it never reappeared. But my hand still had the dust on it from reaching inside for the switch. But it was not the dirt that was outside. It was clearly different dust. I have no idea what I saw, but I'm glad I did not crawl inside now, as at the time it wasn't scary. But now, thinking back on it, it's terrifying to think about. I was hiking in the woods with my friends in Eastern Europe. I want to keep this place anonymous. It was 4 of us. We were going on a week-long camping trip and really wanted to make the most of it, hike around the area, and just have a great time, the 4 boys. We went out there and on the first day picked a pretty nice spot to set up camp. We brought our fishing supplies and we're going to do some fishing one of these evenings. We were all very excited. There were booze and all the necessary junk food to ensure a great time. Now, where we were camping wasn't too far from the car park, and we could very easily drive into town when we needed more stuff. We intended to explore, but not go very far. Anyway, onto the story. The first few days were great. We were buzzed, having a great time, sharing stories, and generally just hanging out with friends and being in good company. It was on the 3rd day that we decided to pack up our stuff and go further in. There was a nice watering hole where we could fish in the evening and see if we could get any good catches. So we thought we'd try our luck. We set up camp nearby and started fishing. At one point, we really wanted more junk food, and even though we'd moved campsite, it honestly wasn't that long of a walk back to the car park. I volunteered to go to the local supermarket, which should still be open, to pick up all the beers and junk food my friends wanted. I think it was about a 20-minute walk through the woods and then a 10-minute drive, so I would be gone at most an hour and 10, an hour and 20. It's not like the fish were biting very much anyway, so off I went. I got to my car and drove off into the town. Nothing eventful happened. I got to the shop, bought all the stuff, and started making my way back. One tidbit that I do remember is that the security guard was at the store, and he was frantically looking at his watch. It became very clear, to me anyway, that the shop was almost closing, so I was quite fortunate I arrived when I did, 11:50. I left the store, and it closed pretty much straight away, and I parked up in the same spot I was in before not too long ago. I grabbed my bags and began walking in the dark to where my friends were. Now to me, with all this extra weight, I think the journey must have taken about 25 minutes, as I did have to stop and break every once in a while. But when I arrived to the fishing place where they weren't there. I went round to the campsite and only one of my friends, Johnny, was there. I asked very nonchalantly where the other 2 were, as I put down the bags on the dirt and started rummaging through to open a bag of Doritos. He gave me a fierce look and asked me angrily what the hell I was doing, why I didn't answer my phone, and where the hell was I? I pulled out my phone and showed him. There were no missed calls. But at that moment, I noticed something incredibly odd. The time on my phone now read 4:40 a.m. What? I looked at my phone and over to him and said out loud, "What the hell?" I explained to him that I was there just before the shop closed, drove back, and walked the 25 minutes with the shopping to get back here. He yelled at me, calling me a liar, and we were having an argument about this. I told him I didn't know what to say, that is honestly what happened, but that somewhere in between the drive, arriving, and walking to the site, did I lose so much time? I genuinely am clueless as to what happened. My friends had even gone so far as to walk through the woods, call the police, and start a proper hunt to see if I would show up. But there I was. My friends were informed, as were the police, that I had been found, and they came back pretty pissed as well. I did try explaining to them, and said that if we would go to the shop in the morning, that the security guard and footage would be able to prove what I did. Not to mention that the beers were still very cold when I put them down, further proof that they had been where I said they were. I opened the beers tentatively and realized that they were still quite cool. Certainly not warming up for being in the warm climate and heating up for 4 hours. Everyone felt very uncomfortable. In the morning, we packed up our stuff and all went home, and never spoke of it again. I still don't know what happened that night. Part of me really does wish to know the truth, but another part of me thinks that maybe this should just be forgotten. Maybe there's something sinister or strange at work, and I just got off lucky. In any case, I try not to think about it too much, because it always gives me the heebie-jeebies. Back in 1987, I was sitting in class and had to this day the most intense and vivid daydream I'd ever experienced. I was sitting in class looking at the clock, when the next thing I know I'm walking through the mall with a woman who I've never met before. I was an adult, and I knew she was my girlfriend. As we were walking and talking, some guy started shooting people randomly. Before I had the chance to react, I felt something like a punch to my chest. When I looked down, I was standing over my own body, with a pool of blood spreading around it. I watched the chaos of the scene unfold in real time. My girlfriend was over my body screaming, and I was trying to comfort her. I watched the police neutralize the shooter. Then the other emergency workers cleared the scene. I watched them remove my body. I tried to follow, but I was unable to leave the mall. I lived/haunted the mall for a few years. As a spirit, I was bored, so I would mess with the security guards during the night shift. During the business hours, I would try to interact with the customers. Every now and then I would get someone to nod hello or walk around me so we wouldn't collide. I remember an elderly man sitting on one of the resting benches have a heart attack. As he was standing over his body, I walked over to comfort him. I had an overwhelming feeling that it wasn't his time to die, and told him so. He climbed and sank back into his body as the emergency workers were resuscitating him. One day I was sitting on one of the resting benches as a young boy around the age of 6 or 7 sat down next to me. He started talking to me, and when he did, I felt something weird happen, and I knew I was about to leave with him. I became his invisible friend. His name was Brian, and was the only child of a single mother. She was an abusive alcoholic. I helped him survive life. I taught him not to talk about me, so that they wouldn't think he was crazy. I experienced being with Brian for years. When he was about 10 years old, his mother came home drunk. She went into a drunken tirade and hit Brian. I lost my temper, and was able to slam her into the wall. She never hit him again after that. I watched him grow into a teenager, and when he was 18, I knew that my time with him had come to an end. We said our goodbyes, and just like that, the daydream was over. I looked at the clock, and maybe a minute had passed. I had experienced just short of 2 decades of existence as a ghost in a minute of time. I died I saw it. I lived it. Either it was on another world with a version of me that died, or I'm going crazy, but I died. We had a prep rally in school, and after it was finished we had to go back to class. Well, my friend and I were not in that, so we wanted to go across the street to Sonic. Across the street there is not heavy traffic, but if you don't pay attention you can get hit. Well, I remember walking with him and he dropped something, so I went across the street first. I just saw a red Tahoo heading right at me and I got hit. I remember everything, gasping for air, waking up, and sleeping again. Then nothing. All of a sudden I was back in this stadium again, and the exact same words came out of my principal's mouth. My friend wanted to go get Sonic, but I was freaking out and was asking him everything. I thought it had to just been a dream. But when I went with him to see what would happen, he dropped his stuff again and I waited. To my horror, the same red Tahooey shows up, and I told him that I'm going back to school, not dying again. I can still see the other version of me on that street just messed up, not even moving. I used to work at a soup kitchen one day a week. This was about 10 years ago, and I still think about it from time to time. It's something I really loved doing. I had to stop because of health reasons. The place was run by a local church, and they had a group of regulars that worked there every day. Because of this, everyone had their own job or station that they worked every day. I was an outsider because I didn't go to church there, so I was basically just ended up doing wherever they put me for that specific day, and I did different things. So on this day, I was making and handing out tea. About halfway into the service, this middle-aged lady comes up in the middle and makes a beeline towards me. I have no idea who she is, but she looks very upset. Her eyes are wide, and she looks pale, and like she's about to cry. But before I open my mouth, she just says, "You look like my son." I was taken aback, but was like, "Oh, cool." She shook her head and said, "He died a month ago. You could literally be his twin, you look just like him." She was clearly very upset. I honestly felt I needed to apologize that she saw me today, but I didn't know how to go about doing it. She shook her head and started crying. "Almost had a heart attack when I saw you. I thought you were him. How old are you?" I told her I was 25. She shook her head again and said that he was 28, and that he died from a heart attack. I ended up apologizing and told her that I believed that everything happened for a reason, which I regretted saying because it was stupid, and I didn't know what else to say. She turned to walk away without taking any tea, but before she did, she looked back at me and said that God catches up to everyone eventually, and that he finally caught him. I think about that sometimes. I also tend to sleep very poorly, and often only sleep 2 or 3 hours at the most, so it means a lot of lights awake doing something or other than sleeping. A couple of years ago, I got into the habit of going out late to get something to eat and find a quiet place to sit and listen to stories on YouTube or the like. So that's what I was doing on this particular night. It was about 3 in the morning, and I was on my way back home, and ironically enough, I had been listening to Glitch in the Matrix stories. I live in a small town and rarely encounter another person when I'm out this late at night, and the roads are always empty. So I was on the highway, and there wasn't any other car near me. Suddenly, a bright yellow sports car comes roaring up behind me out of nowhere. Never did I see this car, and it was very conspicuous. Bright yellow with green stripes down the sides, and it was just suddenly there. The car pulls around, and as it's passing me, I see a custom license plate. It just says Glitch. I sat there with my mouth open and watched it drive into the distance. Never saw it since. We have 2 dogs and a cat. All 3 of them get fed early in the morning at the same time. Each one of them has their own dish with a specific plate that no one else uses. So one day Zoe's plate goes missing and we can't find it anywhere. It's not in the dishwasher, hidden behind or under anything, it's simply gone. Zoe is a 6-pound papillion, and this is a heavy glass plate. so she didn't just carry it off somewhere. We looked for this thing everywhere and couldn't find it, so we ended up just getting Zoe a new plate for her food. A few days later, that same plate goes missing also. No idea why, so we get a third. This one didn't go missing. However, a few months down the road, I was getting dishes out of the cabinet for dinner, and there was Zoe's first plate. Now you have to understand that I get dishes from there every day, and I put dishes there every day as well. It had not been there earlier that day, or before. I couldn't have missed it. Her plate also never gets put up there, even after it's been washed, it just stays on the floor. The second one never showed up. No idea where that went. We had a dog that was a bit too unruly to be kept inside, so he spent most of the summer on a lead, beside a large group of forsythia up the hill that was our backyard. My brother and I were responsible for his food and water each day, and being brothers, it often became a race. It wasn't exactly fair for the one of us doing the water that day, but it was what it was, and occasionally ended with a full-out sprint down to the steps by the house, with flying elbows and shoving that somehow never ended in disaster. One day it was my turn to do the water. I filled the jug and went up the steps, trudging up the walk to the dog's run. After emptying out the water, I began pouring into the fresh stuff and looked down the yard. My brother was about halfway up there with the food. I laughed and taunted him that there was no way he'd win the race today, since I was almost done. He just shrugged and kept coming up, and went around to the far side of the forsythia. Well, that was odd, but whatever. I'd wait for him to come around and dump food and then start running. I liked the actual races. I finished with the water and scratched the dog's ears for a bit. I went in a bit deeper, scratching and petting the happy pooch, but he never came around. He wasn't in the bushes, he never went back down to the house, and I eventually gave up on the joyful thought of sprinting down laughing at him while he poured the food in and sullenly marched down to the yard and inside. He was standing there in the kitchen talking to my mum. "How do you get back down here?" "What? Didn't you get the dog's food?" "No, he's been here talking with me. Why?" No reason." I'm pretty sure I saw the ghostly doppelganger of my brother, though nothing bad happened outside getting freaked out by it. When I was in high school, I had a habit of taking power naps while everyone was having lunch. I'd curl up in a quiet part of the hallway, put my jacket over my face, and sleep for maybe 15 minutes. This one time I was startled out of sleep by a passing crowd of fellow students. Everyone was in a rush to make it in before our strict teacher would start taking notes of absences. I ran after the crowd, walked up the stairs straight into the right classroom, and sat at the only desk that was left for me. The teacher told us to open our books. Then the world froze, and suddenly the situation sort of reset. I was back in the hallway, blinking sleep out of my eyes because I'd been awoken by passing students. I thought it was a funny coincidence, some sort of brain fart. I went upstairs after the others and sat at the same empty desk. The teacher told us to open our books, and again, reset. The same 2 or so minutes. Woke up to a noise, go upstairs after the others, sit at the same desk. Teacher tells the class to open the books, replayed again. For the first few loops, while it was still more interesting than terrifying, I had so many questions. Was I having an intense nightmare, going insane or something? I was and am an atheist, with zero belief in anything paranormal, so no options other than, "this isn't real," didn't cross my mind. Some loops later, I started doing all these things I'd read about online to see if it was a dream. You know, reading signs, trying to put my hand through a wall while looking away, that kind of stuff. Everything seemed as real as reality to me. My theory and contemplation got more outlandish though. If there was some sort of complex temporal situation going on, the loop would continue indefinitely. Would that mean I'd eventually die of hunger? At the same time, I tried to mess around with the loop itself to see if something would happen, deviating from the route, but nothing happened. I tried staying in the hallway or going outside, but after about 2 or so minutes I was always back in the hallway regardless of my actions. I tried to engage other students and teachers, but everyone seemed preoccupied with their own tasks. If I managed to get someone to talk to me, they were always irritated with whatever I did to deviate them from the loop. "You shouldn't skip class, or the teachers are going to be mad if we're late." I get the same default responses and same tones over and over. I even tried to injure myself with scissors, an incredibly ill-advised move, I know, but at this stage I was basically out of my mind with fear. Luckily, it only resulted with the loop ending faster. I honestly didn't know how many repeats of the loop I experienced, because as soon as I stopped counting as I was getting more and more scared, I stopped wondering about the inexplicable hows and whys. As far as I could tell, the situation could not be explained, at least not by me, and I was the only variable in the loop. So I became obsessed with the idea that perhaps a certain behavior was required or expected of me. I'd seen the time loop trope in fiction before, but in those scenarios there was usually some sort of event that had to either be prevented or instigated. In my case, there was nothing. My self-imposed goal became to stop acting like I was aware of the loop, so I tried to replicate my behavior from the first loop down to the finest detail to my best recollection, but that changed nothing. But I latched onto the idea of perfecting this routine because I had nothing else. Loop after loop of the same thing, they all blurred together in my memory. When you're scared of a fate potentially worse than death, it's incredibly easy to stop asking questions and just function on autopilot. The thing is, I'd have written the whole thing off as a dream, if not for the very last loop. By then I'd completely accepted my fate of living in some sort of limbo where the loop no longer reset. My teacher told the class to open our books, and when I usually would have woken up in the hallway again, the world hung, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. Time seemed to pause for less than a second, just like you might experience in a game when you quick save, and then the teacher went on with the lesson of the day, and life resumed. I don't know what to do with this experience, other than share it on the internet, in the hope that someone is amused for a few minutes, or perhaps if they've got answers to what the hell happened that day. At 12 years of age, my mum let me stay in the truck as she went grocery shopping. As I wait, I see an old guy walking towards the truck with an indescribable look at me, as if I know too much. He stops 5 feet from the truck, looks at me for a few seconds and heads back to the exact way he came. It was rather traumatic for some reason and very confusing at that age. 5 or 6 years later, my dad was showing me some home videos of us at Yellowstone. At Old Faithful, I noticed the same guy, same look, same clothes, peering at us on camera and at me through the TV. I freak out every time I tell this. My wife told me this story. When she was in her teens, about 14 or 15, she and a few female friends were spending the night at her friend's house. They all went to bed around the same time. When they woke up, they were over a mile away from her friend's house in an orange groove laying on the ground. You're talking 5 teen girls, no drugs, no alcohol. Nobody could move them a mile away without waking them. None were known sleepwalkers either. My wife has always been a very light sleeper. I can't get her out of bed in the morning without waking her. Luckily, one of them had their phone on them and had to call for a ride. But here's what I find extra bizarre. My wife and her friends, that I have asked this about, and that she is still friends with, completely accept it as something funny and brush it off. This is not something you brush off as a random and inconsequential thing. Maybe it's a lie, but they were all dead serious about it. It's almost to the point like they were brainwashed about the incident. This line of reasoning is not normal for a person. especially if it's not something that happens regularly. I would lose my mind trying to figure out how I ended up there. There's no logical explanation for how 5 girls can go to sleep with parents home and end up over a mile away in an orange grove. To this day, it is the one thing about my wife I can't understand and subconsciously bugs me because I want to know the truth more than anything, whereas she, the person it happened to, couldn't care less. I don't think that's right. It was last year, close to May, when I was feeling very anxious about an essay I had to give in a week from then. And as usual, as a way to prevent me from having an anxiety attack, I started reading a book on Wattpad. It was a mystery, suspense and romance book, which I remember was so unusual from being what I normally read, and it captivated me. I read anywhere. I could read on the bus, while waiting for the bus, during class, taking a break. I even sometimes read while walking. And this book was so amazing that I couldn't put it down. Then it happened. On May 22nd, my class was scheduled to go to the annual National Book Exhibition, and I remembered that we had scheduled to meet for coffee with the entire class to show off which books we had brought and discuss the seminar which we had to watch about script writing and book writing and the difference between them. But I didn't go to the seminar. I sneaked away to a photography gala a few roads ahead and returned just in time for the coffee. There I was, so uninterested in the conversation that I continued reading my book. In 48 hours, I had already ploughed through 103 chapters and only had 5 more. I was sure I would finish by the time I was home, and I was right. I did finish and even reviewed it, and I had a lengthy conversation with the author too. A week later, I got a notification on my phone that the author updated the 7th chapter of the book, where they had finished. I thought it was a Wattpad glitch, but as I checked it from both my phone and the computer, there were only 7 chapters and not 108. I then went immediately to my chat, and our conversation was gone. I asked her if she had deleted the chapters, and she said no, and then I proceeded to tell her what I had read. She freaked out and asked me how I knew things, and I told her that I'd read it all. She didn't believe me. Figures. I still see notifications about new chapters of the story, and I'm a little bit creeped out. Was it a glitch? Did I see the future? Did my subconscious go that far? Nothing makes sense. I had just been watching a show that was talking about alternate realities and time travel, and it got me thinking about something that happened to me many years ago. I'm going to take you back to 1967. We moved into this house in Martinez, California on Adelaide Drive. I had some weird stuff happen at this place that to this day still perplexes me. But I'll try and keep this on the subject of my blue steamer trunk that I found in the tool shed of this residence shortly after we moved in. I say my blue steamer trunk because it literally had my name on it, first and last. It was taped on the top center of the trunk with the raised letters plastic label maker tape. I found it while exploring the property and wandered into the tool shed aside from the main house. I go inside and ask my mum and dad if it's something they had hid from me and would be mine soon, or maybe that belonged to my auntie after whom I was named. They both said no, but suggested it could have belonged to a previous tenant, as we were renting the home. So I let it go for a bit, which was odd for me, because I was quite the inquisitive child and had always sought answers to all the mysteries of life. I had no idea if my name was common or not, as I was simply 10. Sometime later, I got friendly with the landlady who lived just one street over, and asked her if someone with my name had ever lived there, and explained about the trunk that should be returned to the rightful owner. But she went on to say that I was the only person with that name ever to live there, and suggested perhaps my parents were just hiding a gift for perhaps my birthday or Christmas. But I knew better. My parents were not the types to think that far ahead about gifts, and I would most likely be the recipient of a last-minute gift from the grocery store or something from a thrift store or hand-me-down. I tried to put it out of my mind for a while, and it worked. Our dad and my older brother Jack had used the shed to store tools and stuff for working on the car, but neither of them ever mentioned seeing this blue streamer trunk that took up a large amount of space for the relatively small shed. I remember that Jack had removed the transmission from his old car and stored it in said shed because of the minimal space. It was practically in the middle of the floor, set next to the trunk that was placed neatly under the workbench. Then one Sunday in late spring, I had a great idea for a slumber party. Remember, this was the time of the hippie protests, and things like sit-ins and even love-ins were all the rage. So I decided to have a bake-in, where me and my chosen list of guests would bring their favorite cookie recipes and bake cookies for fun, entertainment, and of course, the all-important ingredients for a slumber party, snacks. All in all, it went pretty well, although my poor parents had to deal with the loud gaggling of a constant train of young girls trapezing back and forth from the patio and the kitchen and bathroom. Whoever thought to build a 4-bedroom house with only one bathroom never had to deal with a preteen bladder. When it got late, we finished cleaning up the kitchen, though I'm sure the patio was a lot messier. We washed our faces, brushed our teeth, and put our pajamas on, and prepared for lights out at midnight. Of course, we rolled into our sleeping bags and pillows and such to pretend that we were going to sleep. We were so high on sugar that we had no intention of doing just that. We tried to play quietly, but if you can ever find a way to have a pillow fight quietly, I'd like to know how, because we certainly did not succeed. My older sister, who was up and sneaking talking to her boyfriend on the phone, told me that if Mum got up and found her on the phone because of us, that we would regret it for the rest of our lives. As you can imagine, we decided on a quieter game. We got into a circle with me standing in the center as the other girls sat on the floor and were trying to do what is now called light as a feather, stiff as a board. Although I wasn't lying down, I'm not sure what we chanted. It was dark except for the street light. I was watching myself in the reflection from the window and saw myself start to rise. It freaked me out, so I looked down at the other girl to see if they were seeing what was happening. Most of them had their eyes closed and were saying something like "rise" in unison. It was then I noticed that Eleanor Nichols had her eyes open, with her jaw gaping. She and I looked at one another and screamed. I promptly fell the 6 inches or so that I had been raised. Everyone had stopped their chant in fright, and my mum popped through the door and yelled that we'd better shut up and go to bed right now. We tried. Well, some girls made it, but Eleanor and I were still too freaked out to sleep. I get up and ruffled through my top dresser drawer, took out a cigarette and matches I had hidden there, and motioned to Eleanor to get up as we tiptoed out the door. We peeked out to see my sister sitting there watching the door. We weren't going to leave that way. The only other way was to climb out the bedroom window and go back around to sneak a smoke. So that's exactly what we did. I took the Salem menthol cigarette, placed it to my lips and struck the match. And as I did so, I saw my little sister coming around the corner of the patio, closest to the back door. She just wanted to share the smoke. But when I said no, I was blackmailed into giving to her some because she was the baby girl, and Mum would believe whatever she wanted to make about me. So I passed it to Eleanor, and she passed it to Sylvia, who of course got hotboxed by it, taking too many drugs. I stomped it out, and thought we'd go back to my room to try to sleep. This is where things get a bit more weird. I thought we went back in the house via the front door where Sylvia came out. Deb, our big sister, wasn't in the hallway, so we got back in the room and our sleeping bags with no issues. However, I awoke just around dawn sleeping on the floor of the tool shed next to the freaking blue steamer trunk that had my name on it. Suddenly the shed door opens, and it's Eleanor and my little sister. They say something like, "You win hide-go-seek. We've been looking for you since last night after the smoke." I just laughed and went along with the idea that I'd hidden there on purpose, but I was perplexed. It's strange, but when you're a kid you can somehow let stuff you can't wrap around your head just go and proceed with whatever comes next, or maybe it was an aspect of the trunk to mask our thoughts about it. Such weirdness was a part of this time. I tell this short event to help express that many other strange and weird and even borderline outrageous things happened at the house. Not sure if it was just the trunk or the location that was the vortex of weirdness. But anyway, my brother graduated high school, joined the army, and was sent off to Vietnam. Our parents started having even more issues than before, and I was 12. Things were changing. I finally went into the shed and extracted the trunk. Nobody could tell me how it got there or why my name was on it, but I slowly opened it. It never had a lock on it, but for some reason I never thought to open it, nor had any other member of the family. Who doesn't open something like that? It had been there for nearly 3 years, yet with all of my questions about it, I'd never once as much peeked inside. Let me tell you, my sisters were always going through my stuff. Anyway, this part is a bit confusing. There was a picture of a girl called Yvonne Streeter, although my sisters said it was just her friend Debbie Streeter. A few years later, when incarcerated in juvenile hall, I met Yvonne Streeter. Yes, Debbie Streeter's little sister. Debbie and my sister Deb had been friends in school, and I had gotten that picture from Yvonne herself. There was also a picture of a cute chubby baby, a black nightgown, a glass water picture, clear with yellow flowers, and some things that proved to be the objects that would astonish and amaze me. One was a paperback script of the play The Wizard of Oz. It had the initials PJ on it. There was also a library book for the script of the musical The Music Man. The card in the front said the last person to check it out was me, and the return date was July 30th, 1975. Remember, I was 12, and this is 1969, when the trunk was first opened. How many years later, I know how this trunk came to be. It was bought for me by my 26-year-old boyfriend to help me pack up stuff while I ran away to live with him in Green River, Wyoming when I was 16. I was found, returned to California, and incarcerated in Contra Costa County Juvenile Hall, where they used the label maker to put my name on it. Okay, so that happens, but there's more. I was sent to foster care in Oakdale, California. My trunk was lost for a time, but eventually got sent to me in my new home. I buckled down and managed a B average on the last semester of my junior year, as well as throughout my senior year. It was quite fun there, and without my family dogging me, I did pretty well. Senior year, I had chosen to be Glenda the Good in my high school performance of The Wizard of Oz, and I had taken the nickname PJ, as my aunt, for whom I am named, had always called me Peggy, and my middle name is Jean. I later also participated in the high school musical The Music Man, though after graduation I went back to Martinez to live with my mother and stepfather. Not a great move, but it brings me to another object found in the trunk. The library book of the script of the aforementioned musical. The local summer stock was holding auditions for The Music Man. I'd already done this musical, and I thought I'd be sure to get a singing role. I went to our local library and checked out the book. I really didn't get the correlation at the time. Really, how could I have completely missed that? I just went forward, and did not give the trunk that I found as a young girl a single thought. So there was the picture of the cute baby. Now, years before, when I'd first opened it, my mum said that it looked like my baby brother, but it wasn't. This is who it was. And now I can write it down and deal with the weirdness. In 1977, 1 month before my 20th birthday, I gave birth to a 10-pound, 9.5-ounce baby boy. Me and my then husband named the baby Jason Adam Nichols. Oh, my goodness. He was the baby in the picture. Thus the family resemblance to my baby brother. I still don't know how or when the trunk travelled through my own timeline, but I was the one who packed it when I moved out of our house during the separation and eventual divorce from my now ex-husband. This is just some of the weird-ass stuff that happened to me. It is hard for me to even write this out and still perplexes me to this day, but I know that someday I will hopefully completely understand. One time my wife and I were coming back from a dinner night out. When I opened the door of the house, she was sitting at the computer working, as I usually find her when I get home. Nothing unusual. except she was entering the house with me. I shrugged it off and carried on. We went to bed and I told her that I saw her sitting at the computer, and she goes dead serious and told me that when I opened the door, she saw herself sitting at the computer working. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. The fact that our neighbor's 2-year-old daughter used to point to the TV when it was off and tell us the person on the screen was making scary faces and that she wanted it to go away didn't help us sleep much that night. I had an experience about 7 years ago. I was meeting up with a friend. He'd actually been an online friend for years that I met through gaming when I was a teen. He joined the military and ended up at a base near where I lived, so I picked him up at the airport and we decided to hang for the day. We hit up a GameWorks arcade, and after a few hours decided to head back to my car. I was parked in an underground parking garage, in the second underground floor. On the street level in the main lobby, there was an elevator to the lift, a bulletin board to the right, and stairs on the far left corner. A man and woman were reading something on the bulletin board. Being the lazy young men we were, we took the elevator. Step in, punch G2, and start talking about the games we just played, and watch the numbers change from 1 to G1 to G2. Step out the elevator, look around perplexed as we find ourselves on the ground floor. The couple in front of us, who were reading the bulletin board, turned around and gave us creepy stalker looks. We looked at each other and mouthed, "Did that just happen?" We head for the stairs and reach G2. And I turned to him and asked, "You felt the elevator move, right?" "Yep. Felt it move down and stop. The number changed to G2. "Yeah. Then what the hell just happened?" We've spoken to each other about this, and to this day we don't have an explanation. It's probably not the scariest thing you've ever heard, but to me, it always gives me chills. I'm completely certain I felt it move, and I vividly recall seeing the numbers change, so it had to have moved. I'd call myself insane if I'd have experienced this alone, but since I had a friend with me who also recalls the same details, I know it must have happened, and that something freaky was going on. A few years ago, I was just coming home from work, absolutely shattered from another grueling day at the office. My boss, Janice, had given me a motherload, and I was suffering for it, with deadlines approaching. Now, I'm not sure what this experience was. Was it a product of my exhaustion, or something more? As I'm walking up to my building, I grab my keys as I usually do, swipe the fob, and open the door. The post boxes are on the left-hand side, and as I go to my post box, I insert the key and flip. Inside there are a few parcels. I get them, look through my mail, put them under my arm, and open the next door to make my way into the concourse of the elevators. It was there that I pushed the button, and I look to see where the elevator is currently at. Floor 12. Great. It'll be a minute before it comes down. So I start to absent-mindedly look at my envelopes, opening my letters and seeing what I had received. After I was reading this boring document sent from work, did I hear the familiar ding of the elevator. It arrives, and I look to see who's coming out of it. The thing is, it was me. I was wearing a completely different set of clothes. I looked like I was going to the gym. The other me didn't even notice me. He just walked right past me, opened the door and left. I was so taken aback that the elevator doors closed on me, and they went up to an even higher floor, and it took a while before it came back down. When it opened again, there was no one there. I was feeling incredibly confused. Was my mind playing tricks on me because I was so tired? Or was it something else? I got in the elevator, rode it all the way up, opened my apartment door, and everything was as it was. I still don't know what to make out of that day, but it's never happened before or since, and I'm glad to live without that fear. For the past week, I've been staying at my mum's while I transfer my belongings from my old apartment to my new one. As there are no Tim Hortons near her, I settled for McDonald's for my morning coffee needs. Each morning I've gone through the drive-thru, ordered a medium, paid and been on my way in under 2 minutes. Even with the usually quite crowded lines, this morning was different. When I arrived at my usual time, I found no one in the drive-thru. 2 brown garbage pails blocked both lanes, and there were almost no cars in the lot, except for 2 parked at the very back. Strange, but I've seen stranger. I parked and went in. The doors opened, but the restaurant was deserted, save for one old dude nursing a coffee and doing a puzzle in a paper. 2 young adults stood behind the counter as I approached, neither of them really moving or smiling or doing much of anything. "What can I get you?" one of them said, not even bothering with the usual pleasantries and smiles managers generally press service workers into saying. I ordered my coffee, put exact change on the counter, plus 20 cents, and the kid took it. Then I went to grab my coffee. The 2 kids working took ages to figure out the machine, and 5 minutes later, when I finally got my coffee, the order was wrong. It was black. I had requested cream and sweetener, but at that point I was getting a weird vibe and just wanted to leave. Curiosity, however, prompted me to ask, "Hey, so do you know why the drive-thru is closed?" He stared at me for a few seconds and then said, "Nope." There was still no one else in the restaurant in the few minutes I'd been there, and my desire to get the hell out of there was growing, so I hightailed it out of there. The creepiest thing that happened once I got back outside was the lot was full. Every single space had a car in it, but there was no one in the cars, and no one in the lot, and no one in the restaurant aside from the older guy with the newspaper. One car sat idling at the drive-thru window, with a guy who was staring straight ahead, and there was no one at the window at all. On the other side of the McDonald's is a bath fitter place and a funeral home, both of which were closed at 7:30 in the morning, and on the other side a bakery which was also closed. Residential houses surrounded the area. There is nowhere else so many people could have gone to in that hour for no reason and left their car at the parking lot. I got the absolute worst full-body shivers, got back into the car and took off really quick. I have no idea what that was about, what was going on, or if it was my coffee-deprived brain not making sense of everything, but it was genuinely an unsettling experience. 15 years ago, my family and I went to a pre-Hispanic ruin at night to watch an announced planet's alignment. We went there because it's a rural place and a 1-hour trip from a major city, and there are no lights to bother you so you can star watch. Once there at about 10 p.m, we tried looking for the planetary alignment, but no one knew how to identify any planet, so we just watched a pretty starred night, with 2 of my cousins deciding to follow up a hill trail to see what was behind it in search of the unknown, or perhaps something paranormal. We walked for about 20 minutes and found a house with dogs. They began barking at us, and we decided to return. That's all my cousin and I remember for the trek. Meanwhile, the rest of my family had a really strange experience. When they lost sight of us from the distance, they saw a light that moves towards them really slowly without sound, but with strong winds at ground level to move with it. When the lights reached above them, my mother and my aunt screamed, and everybody sheltered in their cars. They wanted to leave, but my cousins and I were still missing. Then, the light kept moving and was lost over the hill that they were trekking. My dad, my brother and my other cousin went up the hill searching for us but couldn't find us. They waited a long time and then again went up the hill for us. They said they also reached the house with the dogs but couldn't find us. They came back, waited, and were very worried. Then we came down as if nothing happened. I remember my family were really worried and asked us why we took so long, and then We just got into the cars and left as quickly as we could. I didn't know anything about why they were worried and didn't ask. Some years later, my mother and my aunt told me this story, asking me why we took so long and if we saw the light. Just then I realized that the trekking for my cousin and I was about 20 minutes at best, but for my family, it was 2 hours or more. Last year, my girlfriend and I went up a bike trip through the trail, and I was expecting to see the house, but I couldn't find it. I'm planning a new trip there to see if I can reach the lake. It certainly weirded all of us out. My girlfriend is a manager where she works, and since the pandemic has affected everything, she's been working from home. She can't afford to be away from her computer for any length of time, so I pick up the slack by working around the house and running errands. Errands were the order of the day, and I needed to go to our big local big box wholesale store to pick up some things, then the hardware store, and finally the supermarket for some dinner items. The trip to the wholesale store took longer than expected due to roadway construction, and I was very frustrated and angry by the time I made it to the street and was en route to my final stop. Traffic from that point on was moderate, but I was still annoyed from the earlier mess, and drove more aggressively than I should have. Finally, I made it to the supermarket where I collected the needed items, but when I tried to go through one of the self-checkout stations, the damn thing kept messing up, and my earlier frustration was redoubled, as it was all I could do to not scream profanities at the thing. But I managed to get my items and get back out to my vehicle. I sat there for a moment, letting the air conditioning cool me off as it had been quite warm outside. I was still aggravated and frustrated by the entire experience. So, I tried to calm down and scrolled through my phone to get my mind focused. As I stared casually at the screen out of my left peripheral vision, I saw a woman walk towards the store entrance. She was wearing a light 3/4 sleeve shirt, greyish coloured shorts, and a black piping. Her hair was pulled up in a bun on the back of her head, and she wore large brown sunglasses, which she was adjusting with her right hand. I watched her for a moment as she headed into the store. Now, I don't know if my earlier heightened emotional state had anything to do with this, but not more than 1 minute later, the exact same woman walked past me in front of me again. Now, let me be clear, this wasn't another person who looked like this woman, not a twin, nor had the woman returned to her vehicle without me seeing her. This was not deja vu. This was the same woman, same clothes, same hair, and sunglasses that she adjusted with her right hand in exactly the same manner as before. My jaw hung slack as I witnessed this. I couldn't make sense of it. I have never had anything like this happen to me. I was totally freaked out. I thought about going back to the store to try and confirm what I'd seen, but I knew that I was not seeing things, and that this actually happened. Ultimately, I elected to just go home. Sometimes I wonder if the Matrix really exists. "10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were around 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we come around a bend. It was a full moon, and we could see the reflection from the lake below us, and other than the road, it was completely empty. Suddenly, everything went completely dark in the car. No lights, no dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police a 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar. After about a minute, the driver of the car turns the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." Then we realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it had just a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an old time. We turned off the dash lights, headlights and gauges, restarted the CD player, but when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were an hour late. I'm missing an hour of my life, and to this day, I have no idea what happened. I woke up one morning and went downstairs. My dad, stepmom and sister were all in the living room and stared at me in complete disbelief. They explained I'd already come down the stairs 5 to 10 minutes earlier, and they all said good morning as I walked past them without replying into the computer room. I would have assumed sleepwalking, except they would have had to see me walk out of the computer room and come back upstairs. I was playing around with lucid dreaming at the time and trying to have an out-of-body experience, so make of that what you will, even though I don't remember any of it. I used to walk some trails in a small park in my city. I was a 15 or 16-year-old girl who loved the peace and quiet of the woods as opposed to the heckling of the street. One day I go into my usual time after school at around 3 p.m. or so. I wander my usual route, and I should add it's not possible to get lost because these woods aren't very large. I notice it's getting dark quite quickly, almost out of nowhere, and suddenly I get a call from my mum, who is flipping out and demanding to know where I am. She says that she's been calling me for an hour. I tell her I never received any calls, and I've been walking like I always do. She tells me that I've been gone for 3 hours, but I'm never gone for more than 1. I check my phone and sure enough it says 6. Somehow I lost 2 hours of my life in those woods, and I have no idea how or why. It felt like an hour to me. My mum's calls also never showed on my log, even though I should never lose service in there. Ever since I was a kid, I have what I call doubling occasionally happen around me. I put something in my pocket and then find it in another pocket, as well as in the original pocket I had it in. And yes, it's happened with money before. The most standout example was when I was a teen at camp. All the leaders had engraved plastic name tags, and we were all issued only one. I used to keep mine between my hat and my shirt. At the end of camp, I just crammed all my stuff in a duffel and headed home. Later, when I unpacked, the first thing I do is pull out my hat with my tag in it. And of course, a minute later I pull out a shirt with the same name tag pinned to it. I also have experienced a similar phenomenon when I was a kid. For a few years it happened on a daily basis, but I haven't seen it much in a long time. Someone would place something in their pocket or backpack, but when they went to grab it, it would later be missing. I would then reach into my pocket or backpack and pull it out. I initially got accused of being a thief, but when it happened repeatedly, when I hadn't even been within 20 feet of the victim, my friends and classmates stopped doing it. So they just kind of accepted that it would happen around me. Moral of the story? I'm a quantum counterfeit and pickpocket. We live in the mountains, and there's a little store, a 5-minute drive from our house that closes at 9 p.m. My roomie and I wanted to go to get her beers. It was about 8:40. I agreed and we drove down to the store. And I joked with the guy working there about their evening rush, looked at my phone and saw it was 8:50, and said something like, well, at least we're not bugging you right at closing time or something. We get back to the car and started driving home. This store is off a main road. I mean a main road, but not really. Just the main drive through our area. No street lights, heavily wooded 2 lanes, which we drove back on to turn left. We live in a small community off the right side of the road. About half a mile from where we turned onto the main road, there are 3 entrances into this community, which is just a collection of houses in a spider web-like sprawl of roads. All 3 are small roads on the right side of the road, and there are no other driveways or anything. The first entrance is quite a sharp drop on the main road and is easy to miss. It's the sketchiest one to take, and we often miss it because it's around a sharp turn and comes out of nowhere. The second entrance is the one we all usually take when coming from the direction we're driving in. It's across a flagpole that's lit up with a spotlight. It's pretty much the only light on the road. It's definitely not something you could miss. The entrance also slopes down into the park. The third entrance is like 3 miles past the first two. Way down at the front of the park, it has a sign for the park, and when you drive in you get this entrance, the road slopes upwards, while the other two entrances slope quickly downwards. You get the mental image, I hope. So we turn left onto the main road. We're talking about whatever. We're not high or drunk or anything, and we were paying a reasonable amount of attention. Then we see a car approaching from the right, the headlights coming through the trees towards us, but it's coming from the wrong angle to be approaching the main road, from one of the roads that slopes downwards. This car is coming from above where it should be. We both say, "What the hell?" And then we pass the third bottom entrance into the park, which is where the car is coming from. And why is it coming from a higher angle than we expect? We should have taken about 1 minute from turning onto the main road to turning right into the first two entrances. We did not pass the first two, nor the flagpole lit up by spotlights. We even passed the third entrance without realizing what it was, because it was about 3 miles further than where we thought we were. I looked at the clock right when we realized we had skipped about 3 miles of road and it was 9:15 p.m. We had literally left the store at 8:50 and driven about 2 minutes, lost 3 miles and 25 minutes. We have literally driven this exact same stretch of road hundreds of times. We have lived in the current houses for 3 years and this immediate area our whole lives. There was no way we just zoned out and drove 3 miles down a super windy road past spotted flagpole without noticing and spent 25 minutes doing it. We lost 25 minutes of time and are very freaked out. So, some time ago, I came home in our old family house, and when you walk into the front door, there was an armchair facing the TV, and to the left was a sofa, and my older brother was sat on the armchair, and I went to sit on the sofa. Brother's eye view was in my direction, and my mother was in the kitchen cooking. Next minute I heard my sister's voice screaming my name from upstairs. "Yang, come here." I replied, "I'd just be up there in a minute." She screamed at me to come up now, and I replied to give me a minute. She kept on shouting, and so I walked upstairs, and there was no one there. I was extremely confused and walked downstairs and asked my brother where Kim was. He said he didn't know. I walked into the kitchen and asked my mum, and she said that she had gone into town. The strangest bit is that I asked my brother if he had heard me shouting at her, and he said no. I'm still baffled by what went on then. I'm going to share with you something that I've carried with me for the last 24 years, and I haven't really spoken much about since I was a child, and I've never spoken about it on any kind of public forum, such as this. You are free to not believe me. I in fact encourage you to doubt anything that you're told from anyone. I am sharing this with you because as I've gotten older, I've spent 2 decades developing a life to the best of my ability. I've carried an immense weight on my shoulders that neither therapists nor psychiatrists treat as anything other than a method of repressing memories at best, and the delusions of a lunatic at worst. I do not blame you if you draw these same conclusions. I'm sharing this with what I believe has become the most publicly traded speaking place on the internet, for the sole purpose of attempting to drop the weight that I've carried with my life. This is more of a personal cleanse than an attempt to intrigue. And if no one hears this and it becomes buried, I would have at least gotten it off my chest. I am not from here, and by here I don't mean where I currently live. I mean where any of us live. Anyone hearing this right now? It's now a few days after my 30th birthday, and this time of year it always strikes me, because I started kindergarten on my birthday when I turned 5. I thought at the time everyone did that. You turned 5, and when you turned 5 you go to school. I didn't realize my birthday just happened to coincide with the first day of school. And a little over 1 year later, in about 2 weeks' time, it would have been 24 years to the day that my entire world vanished. I was born in San Diego and lived in a poorer suburb of San Diego as a child. I lived in an apartment complex called Lemon Vine Apartments that were a bit of a slummier version of the Lemon Vine Apartments found in Lemon Grove, a suburb of San Diego. My parents were divorced but friendly. My mother was young when she had me and she was beautiful. She was in her early 20s and was aspiring to be a model and would regularly take trips to LA to do photo shoots. She did glamour modeling for magazines. She had a darker skin tone, being 1/4 Indian. Indian, not native, and it gave her an exotic look. My favorite picture of her as a child was her modeling a luxurious wedding dress for a bridal company. I used to sleep with that picture when she would go to LA, and I would stay with my dad, who worked for the city of San Diego. They shared custody pretty evenly, and we even did Christmas together as a family, even though they had split when I was still a baby. My dad, his girlfriend, my mum, who was single, and me. Maybe things weren't as good between them as I remember, but I was 6, so if there was drama behind the scenes, they did a good job of hiding it from me. On September 17th, 1996, I was staying at my dad's parents' in Riverside, California. They had a small farm where they raised chickens, pigs, and goats. No horses or sheep or anything, but my grandma had several pet ducks that would eat seeds from your hand, fly away, and return every year like clockwork. My dad had to work at night for a week, and my mum was in LA, so I stayed with my grandparents. Schools back then were pretty cool with this kind of thing, and I was sent home with the sort of nonsense assignment you'd expect a first grader who'd just gone back to school after summer break ended. The 17th was the 3rd day. I was staying with my grandparents, and my grandpa had told me to be careful outside, because he'd seen a rattlesnake and wasn't sure where it had went to. So, since no one knew where the mystery snake had gotten off to, 6-year-old me decided to go hunting for it. In hindsight, letting a 6-year-old go looking around a farm for a rattlesnake was probably not in any parenting 101 handbook, but it was the 90s, and I guess they didn't actually expect me to find it. There were woods on the property, but I wasn't allowed to go in there, so they'd probably figure that's where the snake had gotten off to. I spent all day outside playing jungle exploration on the farm, trying to track down this rattlesnake, and much to my excitement, when I decided to open the well house, which, for those who don't have one, looks kind of like one of the green electrical boxes on the north side of the road, there it was, curled up, rattling away. I immediately slammed the door shut and ran to my grandparents' house to tell them I found it. Now, this might be my 6-year-old memory exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure the snake was 900 feet long at least, give or take. I found it though, and I was excited to tell my grandpa I'd found it so he could do what he did and go out and shoot the thing. I ran in the back door of the house, which led you to the laundry room and through the kitchen. I paid no mind to anything until I turned left and entered the living room, expecting to see my grandparents, my uncle, and the neighboring couple all sat in the living room where I'd left them. Except they weren't there, and it wasn't the same living room anymore. The furniture was completely wrong. The hard and memorable, uncomfortable hardwood furniture my grandpa loved so much was gone. The coffee table he made out of a tree stump was gone, replaced by a fluffy grandma-looking furniture. A 3-person sofa with a floral design on it. The TV was in the wrong place, and newer than Grandpa's old, sit-on-the-ground cabinet TV. The hardwood paneling on the walls was gone, or at least covered by blue wallpaper. The hardwood floor was a shaggy off-white carpet. The pictures of my dad, my uncle and me and my grandparents were gone from the walls, replaced by paintings and pictures of people I didn't know. As confused as I was by this, I was more confused by everyone being missing. In my 6-year-old brain, I accepted that they may have completely rearranged the house while I'd spent the day looking for a snake, but I didn't believe at all that they'd just leave me alone. And I didn't see anyone leave. I didn't see the cars go. So I walked out the front door, which was attached to the living room, as they usually are, and thought maybe they'd gone to the chickens or pigs, both of which should have been visible from the front porch. But the chicken coop was gone. The pig pen had lost its fencing and there were no pigs to be found. At this point I was beyond confused, and I was getting very scared. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't see anyone. Even though they lived on a small farm, the neighbors that had been visiting lived just across the dirt road. So I ran down our dirt driveway and across the road to their house, assuming that it must have been where they went. I remember getting more and more scared as I ran to their house, and started crying when their house was the wrong color. It wasn't the faded yellow house it used to be. It wasn't even the right house anymore. Nevertheless, I banged on the door. I remember at this point I was crying quite profusely because I didn't understand what was happening, and I kept wiping my face, which covered it in dirt after having been digged around under stumps and logs for snakes all day. When the door opened, a woman in her late 40s to early 50s answered, and I'd never seen her before. I just started bawling uncontrollably. Everything after this point is largely a blur, because nothing was right. I knew where I lived, I knew where I went to school, I knew where my grandparents lived, but I met the people who lived there where my grandparents lived, and they were not my grandparents. I did not know them. I begged for them to get my uncle and tell him who I was, but my uncle wasn't there. Through a series of various police and people in suits, I was brought back to the town in which I lived, after spending what seemed like 10 hours in the local police station trying to contact my parents. I had my home phone number memorized, but told them my dad would be asleep. But when they called that number, the person on the other end had no idea who I was, or what they were talking about. I was asked to give the police officers my address, and sat in the local police station while the police in my hometown went to my address. When they finally called the station back, they were informed that the name of the apartment building was incorrect. Lemon Vine Apartments didn't exist, and the address I gave to them was an apartment complex called Merritt Manor, and the apartment number I gave them was unoccupied. I believe at this point, they were operating under the assumption that I had given them the wrong name of the apartment and the wrong apartment number, but I did in fact live there. When I was finally brought to my hometown after changing hands a few times between police, I was asked to give the police officers my addresses again, and was driven to where I lived. That was it. That was my apartment complex, but just like everything else, it looked wrong. It was painted a different color, and the sign that used to have a large image of a lemon reading Lemon Vine now read Merritt Manor. I took the police to exactly where I lived, and they said, no one lives there. From this point forward, the police attempted to contact neighbors, all of whom knew me. None of them were who they were supposed to be. Every person who came out of the apartment building around me were the wrong people, and they didn't know me. From this point, they attempted to contact my father, which should have been easy as he worked for the city. But no employee by his name apparently worked for the city in any capacity. As day turned to night, I spent endless hours sitting in the police station as they attempted to find any person in the world who knew me. I couldn't do anything but cry and cry and cry endlessly. A woman in a suit who I think was either a detective or just someone who happened to work at the station sat with me for several hours and tried to keep me calm. She gave me a stuffed dog, a Dalmatian puppy, that looked a bit like one of the dogs from 101 Dalmatians, and told me his name was Sparky. She said I could keep Sparky, and that when they found my parents, Sparky would go home with me and make sure I didn't get lost again. She said he was a good dog, and he'd protect me, if I took care of him. During this time, they attempted my school. I told them I went to Shawnee Elementary. It was easy to find. It was really close to where I lived. But a school by such a name, as you guessed it, did not exist. My school was now apparently called Anza Elementary. At one point I was asked if the police had ever taken my fingerprint, and they had. In kindergarten, my entire class had our fingerprints taken by the police at the school gym for basically this exact reason. Unsurprisingly, this didn't help at all. They couldn't find my parents, my grandparents, my neighbors, my apartment, or even me. They couldn't find me. I was too young to remember what my social security number was, but I severely doubt it mattered. They asked my birthday, any relevant information that could help them figure out who I was and where I belonged, but nothing I told them turned up any information about me. At some point during the day, I was briefly taken to the ER, as police suspected I may have sustained some kind of head injury. After being looked over by a doctor, they found nothing wrong with me, and I was sent back to the police station. I ended up staying with someone that night. I'm not entirely sure who it was. Someone from child services, I imagine. I couldn't stop crying long enough to really focus on what was happening at this point. I cried myself to sleep several times in the police station and cried myself to sleep again at the house I stayed in at the night. Despite the woman who I was staying with, not the same one who gave me Sparky, doing everything in her power to calm me down. I clung to Sparky so hard I'm surprised I never popped his head off. I didn't have a picture of my mum. I didn't know what was going on, and no one could find out where I belonged. This didn't make sense to me. I was only 6, just barely. I lived where I lived, and my parents were my parents, and my school was my school. They didn't just all disappear in one day. In between fits of crying and waking up, I begged to just go home. I begged for the lady that I was staying with to try and call my dad again. I just kept begging to go home. Over the next few days, I was interrogated and questioned by different people at different times, at different places, at all hours of the day. Police, investigators, people from departments I still don't know, child psychologists, everyone under the sun was asking me questions. I was back and forth between the police station, the house I was staying at, until eventually someone told me that they thought they'd located my parents, and they were coming to get me. Finally, I was going home. Finally, this was over. Finally, I could get away from all these strange people asking me the same question over and over. When the couple showed up at the police station, my heart fell into my feet. They weren't my parents, but they'd had a son that had gone missing, and I fit his description pretty close. The woman started crying when she saw me, because she immediately knew I wasn't her missing son. But I was out of tears to cry at this point. Eventually, I was collected by child services, and I was taken to a foster family where I stayed for a few months. The police launched a campaign asking for anyone to come forward with information about me. They took my picture at the police station for the newspapers to put in the news. I never let go of Sparky for a second. They didn't want me to hold him in the photo because I didn't have him when I arrived. But I needed him, and I would throw an immense tantrum when someone tried to take him away. They had put me back on the clothes I was wearing when they found me, but they'd since given me new clothes to wear. In those months I spent at the foster home, parents of missing children would come to the houses to see if I was their child. I didn't realize this was what was happening until I was older, and looked back on it. They didn't just pull me out and say, "Is this your kid?" They were a bit more subtle about it. The parents would come to meet me, and upon realizing I wasn't their missing child, they'd often leave in tears. Looking back at all these families that came to see me in desperation that they were going to have their child back, I felt so horrible for them. It's a feeling I can't really explain. Like a type of guilt. Like I wish I had been their child, so they could have taken me back. And now, they were safe. Most of those people probably never saw their children again, but I try and imagine that all of them were reunited, even though I know that isn't likely. The guilt was one of the things that kept me in therapy as an adult. But like I said, no therapist has ever bought my story or believed me. The most common belief suggested to me has been that I was abandoned as a child and lived in an abusive home, dumped on the side of a dirt road in the middle of farmland, and I repressed all the negative memories I had of my past. I didn't stay in that foster home permanently. Eventually, while my case wasn't officially closed, I needed to start going to school. I needed identification, and I was issued a birth certificate for the date that I told them was my birth year. But the day and month were listed as September 17th, the day I was found. I never understood why they didn't just use the day and month of my actual birth, but I imagine it's because they didn't think I knew what it was. My name was unchanged. I started going to school sporadically. One of the child psychologists who had seen me recommended I not be placed back into full curriculum immediately, and suspected I suffered some form of PTSD. I was put in special classes, and was only made to go to school twice a week initially. Eventually, I started going full-time and changed foster homes a few more times. I really can't say how much time passed before it happened, but eventually I was placed up for adoption. I was never actually told I was up for adoption, so I'm not sure how soon after I was found. But eventually people started coming to meet me. But these people weren't looking for a missing child. They were looking to adopt me. But I definitely did not represent myself as a good candidate. I had a story that no one believed or could verify. I insisted my parents would eventually find me, and I rarely had a day that I wasn't crying until my eyes burned. This story does not have a happy ending. I never saw my parents again, and I was a ward of the state until I was 18, and went nowhere from there. My teens were filled with delinquency, and I did a brief stint in something similar to juvie in San Diego called Chaparral. I never went to college, never really started getting my life together until I was around 24. I haven't spoken publicly about this before now, not at least since I was a child speaking to everyone who was trying to figure out where I came from. I still have Sparky. He's old, he's worn, still in one piece, no longer white. He's now a dark shade of grey. He sits on my dresser and is there, just like he's always been, as long as I've been here. I've also been asked a handful of questions, which I think I will address now. The first question is, what things are different in places you came from compared to where you are now? To answer, I'm not really sure. I've been asked about countries, states, laws, planets, languages, you name it. The fact is I don't really know. I was 6. The continents could have been completely different and I would have had no idea. I wasn't particularly bright either. I mean, I was hunting for rattlesnakes. I also thought California was a country. I can say the President of the United States was not Bill Clinton. I can't remember exactly what his name was, but we had to learn it in kindergarten. I think his name might have been Robert or something. I want to say Robert Wilmer, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, that's my story. I doubt anyone will hear this, and it's likely to be buried within 15 minutes. But it's now off my chest and in the open, and hopefully I can go to sleep with a little bit more weight off. Back when I was a kid, early to mid-90s, our town was a bit smaller than it is now, meaning we sort of knew nearly every store or business inside it. We weren't a small town in the middle of nowhere though. It was a suburb of Baltimore and DC. I was around 9 when I remembered clear as day that my parents ordered me this colourful wooden bed from a local store that sat in the same shopping centre as our main 7-Eleven. I would ask when the bed would come, and sometimes my parents would say very soon, but other times they had no clue as to what I meant. As years went on, I would ask about it whenever we would drive by the shopping centre, and like years prior, the answers were always mixed. Sometimes they would say, "What bed?" and other times, "Yeah, we cancelled it when we got the day bed." During my junior year of high school, I was taking driving lessons in the same centre with my cousin. When I told him about this, he would joke about it just being some fluke. One day while waiting to get picked up, we decided to go in there, and I swear the same man I remember that sold us the bed was in there, not even aged. He greeted us, and I asked if they ever sold kids' beds. He said no, that they usually sell couches and the sort, and I told him about the bed, and he said he'd never seen such a thing. Fast forward a few years later, our high school friend goes shopping for a bed for her son. Where does she go, and what does she buy? That bed, the one I remembered buying but never getting. What's worse is she got it from the same store. I flip, because it felt like my whole life was a lie. I decide to go back to that store, this time with her, since I knew for a fact she bought the same bed and that the damn man is there. This time he did look older, but not by much. Anyhow, I asked him why he told me a long time ago that they never sold kids' beds, when this girl just bought one. I thought my parents brought it for me as a kid 15 years ago. He proceeded to tell me that they have always sold kids' beds, and that the model she bought is one of their oldest selling. My cousin even remembers the guy saying that they never sold kids' beds, so I'm not alone on that. I still don't know what happened. I gave up after that. It was bizarre and freaked me out. I will swear to God that I remembered that bed, and I remember my parents getting it. That store is still there, with its same old sign, and I imagine the same old man. This happened a long time ago, back when I was dating my boyfriend Tim. I decided to visit him. We lived in separate areas at the time, and we had a good time. And after staying with him for a few, he brought up the idea of going to Land's End. Tim mentioned how it used to be a swimming pool next to the ocean, and that his mum used to go there when she was little. It had since burnt down, but had a nice view and an even greater view of the sunset. We had planned on going the next day, but Tim woke up late, so we went the day after. After maybe 20 or so bus rides later, we arrived. At the top, there was a path leading downwards. It stopped on flat ground with a path leading to the right and another path continuing down. The path on the right went on for a little bit before it stopped at the mouth of a tunnel. Inside the tunnel was a path that led to the other side. While inside the tunnel, you could see something dripping and ocean waves. The path on the other side was long enough to fit maybe 4 or 5 people before it suddenly ended with a gap, disconnecting it from the continuing path on the other side. The gap was large enough that if you tried jumping to the other side, you'd probably fall or have a small chance of making it. On the other side, there was a wall on the right with rubble around it. Beneath us was a long trip down into the ocean. The downwards path continued before stopping on flat ground. On the left, there were broken walls, some curving, some straight, with most being small and flat enough to walk on. Others were higher and took squarish shapes. These places were filled with shallow water. Tim and I first decided to stop at the higher area and look around. We went through the tunnel, enjoyed the ocean view before moving to the lower area to explore. We both walked around the area and explored some more, walking on some of the paths to kill more time. As night approached, we headed back to higher area, as Tim mentioned the view would be better, and he was right. We were joined by a group of people, and we all watched the sun set in the sky. Tim and I decided to stay later to watch the moon, something I enjoy. As we stood watching the moon, more and more left before we were the only people left. As it got later, we witnessed a sight. The moon was moving, not in the slow crawl it usually does, but more like it was taking a light jog across the sky. We both thought it odd and strange, so we decided to see if we could see it on the platform of the other side of the cave, so we headed in. We were using our phones to help lighten the area as we walked. I had noticed that the sounds heard from earlier were gone, and were instead replaced with silence. We came to a stop hearing a growling noise. We looked around with our phones, but couldn't find the source of the noise. It wasn't like a stomach growling, but more along the lines of an animal. We both ran out of there and hightailed it back out to the walkway entrance. When we got back to the entrance, Tim mentioned the moon. Turning towards it, I looked at it in shock. Instead of being in a spot along with its jogging path, it was back to where it was before it started jogging. It was as if the moon had been reset. When I was younger, I used to go round my nana's house to watch TV after school. She had Sky TV and we did not. So I'd always want to get my fill of cartoons. I'd always ring her in the morning and ask if it was okay. Now I can't say for definite if I rang her on this morning. I feel like I would have done, but I can't be certain. So I go round and knock and nobody comes to the door. I try to open it and it was unlocked, which is unusual in itself because my nana's house had been broken into not too long before, and she was pretty good at ensuring its security. So I get inside and call my mum to tell her that I'm at nana's but that no one's home. She says she'll send my sister, as she must have been 17 at the time. My nana only lives 2 streets away from my mum, so my sister got there pretty fast. I don't know how much time passes, but at some point there's a knock on the door. My sister, being a bit of a wimp, she sent me. Now what's really strange is how you get to my nana's back door. She lives in a terraced house, but is one of those streets where every 10 or so houses there's a break for a little alley that leads into people's back gardens. To get to the back door you have to walk past the front door, go down this alleyway, through the garden and up the back door. Also, the conversation went like this. Does your nana still live there? Yeah, I'm her grandson. Oh, I was looking for your nana. Now the way he spoke was kind of airy and confused. He didn't explain who he was, why he wanted my nana or anything, and I don't remember how we ended the brief conversation. I just remember turning to my sister, who was cowering in the hallway, and her telling me he looked exactly like my granddad. I could see it all clearly, and he was his absolute double. Now the disappointing part. I can't remember anything else. I don't know where my nana was. I don't know why her door was unlocked. I know my sister said at the time to not tell my mum because she thought it might upset her. But looking back, it was all just so weird, because my grandpa had passed years before. One Friday, my stepmom picked me up to take me to my dad's house, like a usual Friday. We drove down our normal route home, which was through a wooded area which leads onto the main road, which we take directly to where my dad lives. Anyway, as we were driving through the wooded area, we were just talking, listening to the radio, where we came to an N-shaped road. Like I said, we were just chatting, minding our own business, when a car starts coming around the corner on the N-shaped road in front of us, with its lights at full beam. This is the middle of the day, so we can see clearly, and there's no need for headlights to be on. It seemed to be coming round rather fast, but we didn't pay it much mind. The road was very narrow in the woods, so as it approached, my stepmom pulled over like the normal procedure to allow this car to pass. Just to look up and see it vanish from reality in front of our eyes. This freaked us out a lot. From what I remember from the car, it had its headlights on full beam and may have been a white color, and didn't look really old either, maybe 90s plus. This event happened about 2 years ago now, and I remember it very clearly. This happened 3 times, with 3 different people. I grew up in a 2-story house in the Philippines. Upstairs there was a huge playroom and 4 bedrooms. When I was around 11 years old, me and my babysitter were hanging out in the playroom. She went to the bathroom, and I got bored, so I went downstairs to check out the fridge. I heard her come out the bathroom, and she started screaming my name. After the 3rd time, she stopped. I thought she figured out that I was downstairs, and after a few minutes, I saw her coming down the stairs. As she looked at me, she froze and just stared at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she saw me in the playroom before she went downstairs. She was really freaked out about it. And I don't know, I used to not believe in these things, so I just laughed at her. The 2nd time it happened, I was probably 16. I was hanging out in my brother's room because it's the room with the fastest internet. And then I heard my 6-year-old brother, as I have 2 brothers, calling me and looking around for me. I didn't answer back and just waited for him to find me. I saw him go into my room and then he got quiet. I thought he was looking for something and just found it. As he was walking out my room, he saw me in my brother's room and he just froze and stared like my babysitter. I asked him what was wrong and he said, "Why are there 2 of you?" And that's when I freaked out and ran to my mum's room. She laughed at us, but I remember sleeping in her room that night. The last time it happened was when I was 20. My parents were on vacation with my youngest brother, so me and my other sibling had to stay at my grandparents' house at night. The first night they were away, me and my sister decided to go home and get more clothes. We were both in my room because she likes to borrow some of my clothes, and I told her that I'm going to take a shower. That's when she left and went to her room to pack more clothes. I went to the bathroom and started brushing my teeth. As I was about to get into the shower, my sister walked into the bathroom, and she looked at me so weirdly and her face turned pale. So I asked her what was wrong. She said she went back into my room and she was talking to me, but then she had to pee, so she went to the bathroom and found me here. We both looked at each other, grabbed our stuff, and left. I still don't know why or what it is, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. So about 3 or 4 years ago when I was still in college, I went over to my friend's apartment because we had a group homework thing to do. It got pretty late, but we got there maybe at 6 or 7 p.m, and it was probably around midnight or 1 a.m. at the time. All of us were smokers, cigarettes, terrible habit back then. So we went down to the common area of the building which had a pool and some seats to hang out. But more importantly, it was an outdoor area with no roof over our heads, to take a smoke break from all the homework, which had been mostly finished at this point, and just hang out. This whole pool area was completely deserted at the time except for us, but it was near the main entrance of the building and the only other person nearby besides us, as we were a group of 5, was the doorkeeper of the building. In any case, now that I've set the scene, this is what happened. It was around 2:30 or 3 a.m, and the sky all of a sudden got clear. And I mean not clear as in daytime, clear kind of like dawn, which was weird because in my city sunrise, it happens at about 5:30 to 6 a.m. So it's definitely still early, and we all got freaked out. Even the doorkeeper left his station and came near us and said, "It's really early to be this bright, right?" To which we all agreed. It was far too early in the AM for it to be this clear, and I mean it wasn't like it suddenly became daytime, but definitely clearer. We could see shapes of buildings and billboards that just seconds ago were too dark to see. We all got freaked out, but not scared, so we just kind of talked about it amongst ourselves. None of us had ever seen anything like that before. It was no later than 3:30 a.m. when this happened. We stayed there until 4 a.m., just talking and hanging out. Then I drove home. All this time it never got dark again, but I was in bed before it was normal for the sun to rise in my city. I never gave it another thought until I realized it could have been a glitch. I had never experienced something like that in my life before, and never have since. I went back to my friend's apartment and hung out at the exact same area at about those hours in the AM a bunch of times, after having that over the next 2 to 3 years of college. None of us ever experienced anything like that day again. It is completely out of the ordinary or normal for it to be as clear as it was at that hour in my city. I've never seen it happen again. It was 3 a.m., it was pitch black a second ago, and then it got clear like you'd expect at 5 or 6, just when the sun is setting and it's starting to get dark. This happened to me just last month. I'm currently dog sitting for my best friend and staying at her house while doing so. Some context. I watch this dog every weekend for half of the year, and I'm over at her house all the time when my friend comes home. The dog is female, and she's very unfriendly to anyone she doesn't know. She'll literally bite people that she doesn't know very well, even if they've met a few times. Even with her owner and myself, she's often very standoffish, and will bite if she's in a mood. She's also not big into cuddling, especially at night and in bed. The dog is like a cat. You have to do things on her terms, or risk being snapped at. With that being said, she would not leave me alone last night. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to her insistently licking my face and trying to be close to me. I'd shove her away, and she'd just crawl back up to me and wake me up again. When I buried my face to keep from getting licked, she just dug into the covers to get close to me. She'd eventually leave me alone for a short while, after practically crawling on my head to sit as high on the pillow as possible and pulling my hair by doing so. After several bouts of being uncharacteristically woken up like this, I thought that maybe she just really needed to use the bathroom. I reluctantly took her out and went back to bed. Not long later, she woke me up doing it again, but this time whining when I'd shut her out by hiding under the blankets, thinking that maybe the heater was on or that I was scaring her. I turned it off, and with the heater no longer making noise, that's when I heard it first. It was a click-click sound of a dog walking around on the hardwood floor. It's a distinct sound, and one that I'm very familiar with. The thing is, the dog was in bed. Thinking I was just hearing things with the sound adjusting in the room, I ignored it and laid down to fall back to sleep. Once again, the dog kept licking me, whining and crawling all over my head. I was absolutely baffled, as to this point, I had been dog sitting regularly for over 2 years and had never seen her act like this. Normally, if an animal or person comes nearby, she'll go into protective growl mode. This was something else entirely. I sat up, looked at her, trying to figure out what was wrong, and that's when I heard it a second time, distinctly. Not only did I hear it, the dog heard it too. She clearly responded to the sound, whined, then nuzzled closer to me. I looked around the bed, but nothing was there. Realizing that it was probably just another glitch and not an animal that had somehow gotten in, I decided to return to bed. This dog, that usually never lets anyone cuddle her for more than 5 minutes, let me sleep because I pulled her into a hug and stayed like that. I was absolutely amazed to wake up hours later to her still under my arm. Maybe we're both hearing a parallel version of her walking around, and that spooked her out. Normally, she goes into instant bark or growl mode, often frantically running up to the windows growling when she hears a raccoon or another animal outside. Whatever the case, I think what we heard in the room wasn't normal. Her reaction is testament enough for me. I'll be driving in the highway at night, and it's mostly empty. Then I'll notice a car in my mirrors coming up, usually on the left side, but I can't say for sure. It happened on the right side too. Then I'll go back to watching the road before checking my mirrors again. But when I check, the car is gone. I hadn't passed any exits, and I live in a semi-urban area where there are usually barriers on the side of the road, so there's no way the car could have disappeared off to the side. It's happened multiple times. It's not a common occurrence, but also it's happened enough times that I no longer attribute it to my mind playing tricks on me. I wonder if anyone else has experienced this strange event. So this happened about 8 years ago. It's me and 2 friends in my car chilling in the driveway. We were talking and they were talking. I noticed this cat of pure white sitting 20 feet in front of us. Now my friend doesn't have a white cat, so I was intrigued. 5 minutes or so pass and the cat is still sitting in the same spot. I finally told my friends, "Hey, what's up with this cat in front of us?" All our eyes went to the cat, and it instantly vanished. We all saw it and began tripping out. One friend said it looked like it melted into the ground. I still question it to this day, and my 2 friends still remember that moment. Last night, I had a glitchy experience. I bought oregano oil capsules, and I take them before bed. I specifically took one out, put it in my mouth, and swallowed it and left my room. I came back to my room and noticed that there was an oregano capsule on my bed. Weird, I thought to myself. I just took one. So I put the capsule back into the bottle, along with the others, and left my room. I came back to my room after showering, and the exact same capsule was on my bed in the exact same place as before. I started freaking out, because I remember taking a capsule specifically, and also putting the one that was on my bed back into the bottle. There was no one home but me, and then when I was walking out of my room, I heard my mirror that was hung up on the wall fall off and hit my record player, and I thought, this is gonna be messy to clean up. I walked back into my room, and everything was perfectly in place and nothing had moved. Am I having a stroke? Or experiencing a glitch? Last year, I was driving down the US, Route 90 in Ohio, going to an old friend's house. We had driven out of the town that they were living in on unrelated business. On the way back to their old spot, 90W bound, we run into construction that was happening at the time on overheads. Pretty sure they restructured the fencing things, or something along that route. Anyway, we are seeing the exit signs for Lorraine, and I think to myself, hey, a few more exits and we're there. Here is where the glitch happens. I see the sign again. Also, the route has a very, very slight right curve as you pass under said sign. I think to myself, didn't we just pass this? And one of the other people in the car says, didn't we just pass this sign? I respond with, yeah, that was weird. The third person in the car goes, what are you guys talking about? And for the moments, talked about the event. I haven't thought about it too much. Maybe just an instance of tunnel vision. But on every fiber of my body and everything I love, I drove under that sign twice that day, and I will never forget that. Early one afternoon, my wife and I decided to head to the store. It was a clear and sunny summer day as we approach a one-way turn up ahead. We were 150 yards away, when suddenly we noticed the figure of a woman emerge from the road, moving oddly and seemingly putting on a dress. We deemed it odd. We figured they must have been down in the sewers and crawled out of the manhole. But upon reaching the end of the street, there was no manhole, only the solid pavement of the street. The woman, disheveled and barely dressed, walked into an alleyway behind a strip mall. I'd seen this woman around town before, and she is very clearly mentally ill, often ranting and raving like lunatics as she walks down the street. But this kind of event fried my brain for a while. The whole thing was very surreal, as we clearly saw this woman appeared to have crawled out of the street, but there was nowhere she came from. It left us pretty unsettled, and we still are to this day. I was leaving a friend's house around 10 p.m, back in mid-December. I was sober and wide awake, as my plan was to go home and finish some quick chores left over from the day. We had heavy rain and weird clouds all day. No lightning though. So when I was getting into my car and noticed the cloud cover seemed to have bright red glows in it, I assumed it was the light from the nearby university refracting strangely into the thick clouds. I got into my car and headed home. My house was a short drive away, 7 to 8 minutes tops. Suddenly the entire sky lit up pink, blue, green, and yellow, in rapid and repeating succession for 10 seconds. The lights seemed to have had no point of origin or bright center, but was coming from behind the clouds as I could see their shapes in front of the flashes. The sky was evenly bright from horizon to horizon, and there was no relative noise. Then it happened again. Random colors flashing brightly for maybe 5 seconds, then darkness. Then again, then 5 to seconds before it was totally dark once more. And that was the last time I saw it. I don't know how to explain this one. Near our house is a small greenhouse of a local tea company, which is often lit up with lots of wacky colors. And if the clouds are low enough, we will occasionally see the light very dimly reflected in the sky. I can't blame this on those. It was far too bright, too far-reaching, and was flashing, not holding a steady color. I also saw that recent video of the transformer exploding in New York City, and this was similar, but what I saw was more than just bluish-white. It was like as if the entire sky was weirdly colored that day for a few seconds at a time. No centralized source of light like a blown transformer would give off. This really freaked me out, for probably no reason, but I definitely stepped on it the rest of the way home. I haven't seen anything like that since, and we've definitely had some similar clouds. I know lightning is capable of giving off unusual colors, but in rapid and changing succession like this? When I mentioned it to friends, they all dismissed it with a quick, weird. Any input into this would be greatly appreciated. The other day, I was walking back from the bus and walked down my street. I was sober, well rested, had eaten food and was wide awake. I had not been exposed to carbon monoxide. I noticed the houses were different, and I started to think I had somehow walked down the wrong street, though I had seen the site for my street when I got off the bus. I figured I'd walk to the main street and go back up my block, but then I saw my own address. I was confused. It was a slightly different house, a little newer, and it didn't seem to be a fourplex like mine. I didn't know what else to do, so I knocked on the door. A woman answered, and I explained I was looking for 1234 Myrtle Court, and she said that this was it, and asked me what I wanted. I said I was a little lost, and was she sure? She was getting suspicious and annoyed and said, "Of course, why?" I stuttered something about thinking my house was here, and she asked if I was on drugs and threatened to call the cops, so I apologized and left. I was in denial. And at the end of the road I noticed a taco place that isn't on my street normally. Usually, it's a few blocks away. On my actual street, there's a mechanic, where there is a burger place across from it. I started to walking towards it because at least it was something normal. When I turned on the main street, things seemed to return to normal. I walked the few blocks down to my house, which was now there, and everything was in its usual place. I was so freaked out I avoided that part of the neighborhood for a while. When I did eventually go back, it was the same number but a different street, and the house looked different than the one the woman lived in. The taco place was on the wrong side of the street, and I had really just been hoping I was just turned around. Can someone please help me explain this? It's really weirded me out. I was napping in my childhood room in my old bunk bed around 5 p.m, which I share with my older sister. I'm napping in the top bunk, which is relatively close to the ceiling and against a wall. Walls and ceilings are a smooth blue color. My sister is chilling in the bottom bunk on her laptop. We are 23 and 25. Both came home for the weekend for my brother's birthday. She answers the phone call, which wakes me up. I open my eyes, and all over the walls and ceiling are small triangles with rounded corners and dots in the middle. Each cluster of triangle forms a pattern of flowers, 5 triangles each, all the tips facing towards the center. These flower clusters all lined up evenly and orderly, covering my walls and ceiling everywhere. They weren't scattered randomly. The pattern wasn't a specific color, translucent or transparent. I stared in shock, confused, and amazed for 2 to 3 minutes, before shutting my eyes for 3 more minutes and opening my eyes to see they were gone. Now, to get into the details. I've had sleep paralysis before. This wasn't it. I was very much awake, could move, and even sat up to check out this pattern. I often have false awakenings too, but I assure you I was very much awake. There was no strange reflection of light, nor was the light shining in my eyes so that I could have imprinted a pattern when I looked around. The pattern stayed on the walls whenever I moved my eyes. It didn't move with my eyes. The pattern was so technical that it's why I explained it as a force field-like. It reminded me out of something of a sci-fi movie. At first I thought it was my contacts. Maybe they were dry because I fell asleep with them. I've never ever had that happen to me before, and I often fall asleep with my contacts. Plus, that pattern, it was so particular. I've never seen that pattern anywhere before, but something about it was almost computer-like. Has this happened to anyone before? I'm just trying to figure it out. It's so weird, I just had to share it. Today I arrive at work, and do the usual when I get in. Go to my desk, set down my purse and clock in. Now everyone at work carries walkie-talkies. It's how we communicate to each other because we are spread out throughout multiple buildings. Everyone has their own walkie and is labeled with their name on it. Part of my morning routine also includes grabbing my walkie so I don't miss it out on any useful information. We have a station where all the walkies are kept on charges at night, so when I go and grab mine, I check to make sure I've picked the right one. This is important to note, because most people might not double check this. But I have another girl who's got a similar name to me. It's only 1 letter off. Every time I grab my walkie from the chargers, I always have to double check that I have my walkie and not the other girl's. So I know for a fact that I grabbed mine with my name on it. Now sometime later, I grab my walkie out of my pocket as I go to use it for the first time today, and read the name on the walkie, Matt. Now Matt absolutely never uses his walkie, so it's always sitting on the charger. There's no way I just accidentally picked up his walkie-talkie and misplaced it with my own, seeing it as he never uses it. I went back to the charging bay, and sure enough, there's mine sitting on the charger. I know with absolute certainty that I picked my own up this morning. I physically picked it up and double-checked that I had it with my name, and not the other girl's, before putting it in my pocket. I was in my bedroom sorting laundry, and I was listening to a YouTube video on my phone. I have YouTube Red, so my phone was locked while the video played. I thought I'd heard a strange noise and thought perhaps one of the dogs was getting into something. I had thought to myself, wow, I really can't hear over this radio, I should probably pause to listen. But my lazy ass decided not to, and I continued sorting laundry. My boyfriend was on dog watch anyway, so it wasn't my problem. Then for no reason whatsoever, the video just stopped playing on my phone and fell silent. It just stopped, and I chuckled to myself because I knew how strange that was. I took the opportunity to listen for the strange noise and heard nothing. I ended up checking to make sure the dogs definitely weren't getting into anything, because I thought that was a clear sign from the universe to go check. Everything seemed fine, so I resumed listening to my video and sorting laundry. This next one is when I was sitting on my couch in the living room watching TV. I had seen the dog going into the kitchen, and seeing as he's a 5-month-old puppy, I didn't like when he's out of sight. I called for him to come to me, and instead of running out the kitchen like he should have, he came running out the hallway coming from the back bedroom. I know for a fact I had literally just seen him go into the kitchen. This last thing happened this morning, and I'm still quite shaken up over it. On Sunday morning I had woken up to find that neither my boyfriend nor I had remembered to lock the front door. So last night I had double checked that the door was locked before heading to bed. This morning I had woken up and did my usual, which was roll out of bed, plop myself on the couch in the living room to browse social media while I convinced myself to wake up. I lay there for 15 minutes until I decide to start my day. I sit up off the couch and look up at my front door. It's open about a foot. Surprisingly, my first instinct was to find the cat and make sure she didn't get out. I ran all over the place calling for her and then ran into my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend. At this point, my cat came out of her sleeping place to greet me, and I was relieved to see that she was safe. In my panicked state of mind, I had told my boyfriend what had happened, and he asked me if anything was missing. I'm not sure why that thought never occurred to me. He got up and checked all the rooms and closets to make sure no one had broken in, and we found nothing amiss. I have no explanation as to why or how the front door was open. I do wish to add one more thing that happened that was very strange. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I was just finishing up cooking dinner, and my boyfriend was going to go run to the party store to grab some pop. I was standing in the kitchen at the stove. Our front door is right outside the kitchen, and maybe 30 seconds after he left and shut the door, I saw the door start to swing open. I thought he had forgotten something and was coming back inside. My 1-year-old dog was sitting right outside the doorway, acting a little excited. And after a few moments go by and I don't see him come through the door, this raises some concerns. I work up the courage to go look behind the door or the doorway, and no one's there. Thank goodness I have a highly trained dog, and she didn't run out the door. I immediately call my boyfriend and tell him what happened. We both kind of agreed he must not have latched the door all the way. After what happened with the door today, I'm not open to believing that something is just wrong with the front door. We tried playing with the door today just to try and recreate it happening on its own, but we couldn't get it to do it. I do, however, stand by what I said in knowing the door was locked last night. At our school, we have an upstairs and a downstairs. Well, I just got out of class and had seen a girl downstairs, and then went upstairs to sit where I usually do, and she comes out the office, and this is strange. because she was walking somewhere else, and the only way she could have made it there was if she passed me without me noticing, or she went outside and up the ramp really quickly, and she had just a shirt and it was freezing outside. This has happened another time with another person, I think the same day or the day before. In my class, I saw this girl grabbing some brown paper towels for a project we were doing, and then went to go get some, and the paper towel was white? I had not long passed my driver's test, and as an 18-year-old, I was never not driving my car. It was late one night, and I had just dropped off a friend at his house. I was driving up a very familiar road to get onto the motorway. There were no other cars in sight, and my music was pretty loud. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a small black cat seemingly waiting to cross the road that I was driving on. It must have been about 10 meters ahead of me on the other side of the road. I was doing about 40 miles per hour, and I figured it would either wait, or even if it ran across the road, I would have passed it before it was in any danger. Just at that, the cat seemingly ran straight towards my car, and I'm 100% certain I heard a horrible thud of the poor thing going under my car, even over my loud music. This is when it gets weird. I stopped immediately. I adore animals, and I was also quite distraught, to say the least, at the prospect of running over a poor cat, and indeed someone's beloved pet. I was also quite shaken, as I was relatively new to driving, and I knew my mother was going to be furious if I damaged the car. I get out and notice there's no cat. I checked thoroughly, as I was pretty sure I'd hit the wee cat. I started to reassess what had happened here, and I looked over to where the black cat had been sitting before this horror, and the same black cat was sitting exactly in the exact same place I'd seen it on my approach, completely unharmed, sitting like nothing had happened. I went over to the cat to see if maybe I had hit it and it was just stunned or something, but no, the cat was perfectly fine and almost happy to meet me. I got back in the car and got on my way. It puzzles me to this day. I'm certain I hit that little thing. Thankfully, it was just some sort of glitch. I live on my own, and I am the only one who has a key to my apartment. 2 weeks ago, I left my place to go on vacation. I have a small black plastic coffee maker that came with a small black plastic spoon for coffee beans. I had it for about 2 months before I went on vacation. I distinctly remember this spoon, and it was black, just like the coffee maker. When I returned home, I couldn't find my coffee spoon anywhere. I checked all over my kitchen and apartment for it. That's weird, but I figured I probably accidentally threw it away or something. This morning, I tried looking for the spoon again, and I found a different spoon in my sink. It's a small coffee spoon, but it's white, and it also has a missing shape to the other one I had. I have no other appliances, and I have no idea where the spoon came from, and I don't remember using this spoon for anything ever. It's kind of insignificant, but it's driving me nuts. Maybe it was a white spoon all along and my brain remembered wrong. Where did my original coffee spoon go?